Hey everyone, tonight we're stepping into a world that's not just harsh but downright brutal for anyone who dared to love differently. Picture a medieval village, muddy streets, smoky huts, church bells clanging like they're personally offended by your existence. Now imagine you're gay in this world. Not the modern kind of gay with pride flags and coffee shop dates, but the medieval kind, where the word doesn't even exist and the feeling could get you burned alive. This isn't a tale of star-crossed lovers or poetic rebellion. It's a grueling, heart-pounding slog through a life where being yourself is a crime worse than theft, murder, or spitting in the Lord's ale. Forget Hollywood's soft-focus forbidden romance. Your life is a tightrope walk over a pit of fire, with the church, the village, and even your own family ready to push you off. So grab a candle, maybe a stiff drink, and let's dive into why it sucked to be gay in medieval time. Drop a comment to tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I'm curious who's brave enough to join this grim journey. You're born in a village so small, everyone knows when you sneeze before you do. Life's already a grind, the air smells of manure, your bed's a sack of straw that pokes you like it's holding a grudge, and your biggest ambition is surviving the next winter without losing a toe to frostbite. But there's something else about you. Something you can't name because nobody's invented the words yet. You're drawn to someone. The world says you shouldn't be. Maybe it's the blacksmith's son, with his soot-streaked arms and a grin that makes your stomach flip. Or the weaver's daughter, whose laugh feels like sunlight in a world of grey. You don't know why your heart races when they're near, but you know enough to keep it quiet. This isn't a world that celebrates love, it's a world that polices it. And your kind of love? It's a one-way ticket to hell. Or worse, the village square with a noose or a pyre waiting. You're barely old enough to haul water from the well when you start feeling it. You're 6, maybe 7, running through the village with other kids, dodging geese and stealing crusts from the baker's stall. The boys wrestle in the mud, bragging about which girl they'll marry someday, while you find yourself lingering when the miller's apprentice tosses you an apple. His fingers brushing yours just a moment too long. Your cheeks burn, and you don't know why, but you know it's dangerous. The village is a fishbowl, and eyes are everywhere, neighbours peering from windows, priests scanning the flock for sin, even your own siblings watching for something to tattle about. You learn fast. Keep your eyes down, your mouth shut, and your heart locked away. You mimic the other boys, laugh at their crude jokes about the tavern maid, and pray nobody notices your hands shake when you pass the one person who makes your world spin. Your parents sense something's off, though they don't say it outright. Your father, a man whose face looks carved from stone, grunts at you to stop daydreaming when you linger too long with the shepherd boy. Your mother, kneading bread with knuckles white from worry, prays louder at church, her eyes flicking to you like you're a riddle she can't crack. You're not sure what you've done wrong, but you feel it in their silence. Their sidelong glances, the way they push you toward the carpenter's daughter like she's the answer to a question you haven't asked. You learn to hide, not just from them, but from yourself. You bury those feelings under layers of chores, prayers, and forced smiles, hoping they'll fade. Spoiler, they don't. The church is the heartbeat of this world, and it's not your friend. Its bells drag you from bed at dawn, its sermons fill your Sundays with warnings of fire and brimstone, and its rules wrap around your life like iron chains. You're taught that God sees everything, every thought, every desire, every time you linger too long watching the tanner's son mend a harness. And God, according to the priest, is furious about it. The church doesn't call you gay, that word's centuries away. Instead, it slaps you with sodomy, a term so vague it covers everything from your deepest feelings to a knight's drunken fumble with his squire. It's not just a sin, it's a crime, a stain on your soul, a threat to the natural order. The priest thunders about Sodom and Gomorrah, cities burned to ash for unnatural acts. And you sit in the pew, head bowed, feeling every word like a lash across your back. You're not just a sinner, you're a walking catastrophe, a potential cause of floods, plagues, or the next bad harvest. By the 11th century, the church gets meaner. A monk named Peter Damian pens the Book of Gomorrah, a screed so vicious it makes your skin crawl. He lists 4 kinds of sodomy, from what you do alone in the dark to the love you feel for the baker's apprentice, and calls them worse than bedding a goat. He wants men like you barred from the priesthood, kicked out if they're already in, no matter their rank or age. He sends his book to Pope Leo IX, who doesn't fully agree but doesn't defend you either. One-time sinners might be forgiven, but repeat offenders, they're out, or worse. You hear these sermons, these laws, and you pray harder than anyone, not for salvation, but for invisibility. You want to disappear, to blend into the crowd, to stop feeling what you feel. But your heart doesn't listen, and that's the cruelest part. You grow up, and the stakes climb higher than a cathedral spire. You're a young man now, maybe a cobbler stitching shoes, or a farmer wrestling pigs in the mud. You've mastered the art of blending in, laughing at the tavern when the men boast about women, nodding when the matchmaker suggests a bride, keeping your eyes fixed on your work when the blacksmith's son walks by, shirtless and glistening from the forge. But every day is a tightrope walk. You're always watching, your words, your gestures, your glances. One slip, a look held too long, a touch too gentle, and the whispers start. He's not right, they'll say. He's one of those. And then what? A visit from the priest, a trial in the village square, or a mob with torches and no patience for explanations. You find moments of light, though, stolen in the shadows. Maybe you meet someone who feels the same, a stable boy with a crooked smile, a weaver whose eyes meet yours in a way that says, I know. You meet in secret, behind the barn at dusk, in the woods where the trees keep your secrets, or in the church after hours when the candles flicker and the saints look away. Your heart races, not just from love, but from terror. If you're caught, it's not just shame. Back in 1120, the Council of Nablus in Jerusalem declared that men caught together, whether active or passive, would be burned alive. Women, if anyone bothers to notice them, fare no better. Hildegard of Bingen, that 12th century mystic with her visions, calls love between women the worst sin in God's eyes. Even Thomas Aquinas, a century later, weighs in, saying, your love is unnatural, second only to bestiality. The punishment? Exile, mutilation, or a pyre. You know this, and yet you risk it, because those stolen moments are the only time you feel whole. You learn to live in fragments, a touch here, a whispered word there, always glancing over your shoulder. You don't get to hold hands in the market or dream of a cottage together. Your love is a fugitive, dodging the church, the law, and the village's ever-watching eyes. You memorize escape routes, the gap in the hedge, the path through the river reeds, the hayloft where you can hide if footsteps come too close. You develop codes, a tap on the wrist, a phrase like, the moon's high tonight, to signal a meeting or a warning. Every moment with your beloved is a battle against time, fear, and the world itself. And yet, you cling to it, because it's the one thing that makes the endless days bearable. The village is a pressure cooker, and you're the easiest target. Everyone's watching everyone else, sniffing out sin like hounds on a trail. A neighbour sees you share a loaf with the miller's son, your fingers brushing too long. A priest notices you avoid the matchmaker's daughter. A tavern drunk mutters something about those types, and suddenly eyes are on you. Suspicion spreads like plague, and it doesn't need proof. The Knights Templar learned this the hard way. In 1307, King Philip IV of France accused them of everything from heresy to sodomy, kissing during rituals, sharing too close bonds. Were they guilty? Maybe some were, maybe not. But torture forced confessions, and the stake swallowed many. You see their fate and know. The truth doesn't matter. A rumour can kill you faster than a sword. In cities, it's even worse. By 1432, Florence sets up a special court to hunt sodomites. Over 70 years, they investigate over 10,000 men and boys, convicting more than 2,000. Some pay fines to escape the flames, but the shame sticks like tar. You're not just a sinner, you're a public enemy, a threat to God's order, a curse blamed for every calamity from drought to disease. You hear about Paris in 1292, where a sodomy scandal at the university got scholars and students expelled. You hear whispers of Venice, Rome, Parma, places where men love men, women love women, even people who don't fit the church's rigid moulds. But they're not safe havens. They're traps, where one wrong step lands you in chains. Your body bears the weight of this life. Your shoulders are perpetually hunched, ready to bolt at the sound of boots on the path. Your eyes dart like a hunted deer's, scanning for threats, a priest's frown, a neighbour's sneer, a stranger who lingers too long. Sleep is a cruel joke. You lie awake, replaying every moment of the day. Did you smile too warmly at him? Did you stand too close to her? Your heart thunders at shadows, and your dreams are filled with fire, iron, and accusing faces. You wake before dawn, check your surroundings, and start the performance again. Work, pray, smile, hide. You're careful with everything. Your clothes, your walk, your words. No bright tunics, no loose gestures, nothing that might mark you as different. You dress like the others, move like the others, speak like the others. But no matter how perfectly you play the part, you can't shake the feeling that someone knows. Your body learns to carry fear like a second skin, heavier than a knight's armor. Your hands tremble when you reach for a tool, not from work, but from the constant dread of being seen. You're not just fighting for survival, you're fighting for the right to exist, to feel, to be. And yet, you're human. You crave connection, a moment of softness in a world of stone. So you steal those moments, knowing each one could be your last. You meet your beloved in the dead of night, your breath fogging in the cold, your hands finding each other in the dark. You whisper promises you can't keep, dreams of a world where you could walk together in daylight. You memorize their face, their voice, their touch, because you know it could end tomorrow. Every kiss is a defiance, every embrace a rebellion. You're not just loving, you're waging war against a world that wants you erased. You're not alone, though it feels like it most days. In the margins of this brutal world, others like you survive. You hear whispers of secret lives, men in monasteries sharing more than prayers, women in convents exchanging vows in the dark, travelers passing through with knowing glances. You learn to spot them, a look held a moment too long, a phrase that carries hidden meaning, a meeting place known only to a few. In Venice, they say, there are taverns where men gather quietly, their laughter low but defiant. In Rome, women live together as sisters, their bond unspoken but unbreakable. Even in your village, there's the tailor's apprentice who avoids marriage, the widow who shares her hearth with another woman. You don't speak of it, but you know. You're part of a silent community, a web of secrets stretching across the world. You develop tricks to survive. You marry, maybe to throw off suspicion, but it's a hollow life, a lie that gnaws at your soul. You avoid taverns where tongues loosen, festivals where eyes wander. You learn to be forgettable, blending into the crowd like smoke into the sky. You work harder than anyone, hoping your skill, your shoes, your crops, your bread makes you indispensable. If they need you, maybe they'll overlook the rumours, but it's never enough. One accusation, and your world crumbles. A neighbour's grudge, a priest's suspicion, a rival's lie, and you're hauled before a court, your life laid bare for all to judge. The laws are a nightmare. Back in the 6th century, Emperor Justinian set the tone, blaming men like you for earthquakes, floods, and plagues that killed 40% of Constantinople. His laws called for castration or death, and that legacy lingers. By the 13th century, Spain's King Alfonso VI ups the ante. First offence, castration for men or mutilation for women. Second, more body parts cut off. Third, you're burned alive. In France, the penalties are similar. Thyancing, mutilation, then the stake. You hear these stories and know, there's no mercy. Even a first offence leaves you scarred, shamed, unable to work or live among others. Exile is the best you can hope for, but it's a death sentence in another form. Cast out, penniless, wandering a world that hates you. You find ways to cope, though they cost you. You pay off a nosy neighbour with your last coins, hoping they'll keep quiet. You bribe a guard who saw you in the woods, praying he doesn't talk. Every penny you earn goes towards survival, not comfort. You don't save for a better life, you spend to stay alive. If you're exiled, you lose everything. Home, family, the village, that's all you've known. You wander, a ghost in a world that doesn't want you, begging for work, stealing scraps, always looking over your shoulder. You're not just poor, you're erased, a shadow with no place to rest. War doesn't help. You'd think chaos might give you cover, a chance to slip through the cracks while the world's distracted. But war makes things worse. Armies need men, and men need to prove their manliness. Suspicion of sodomy can get you kicked out of camp or executed as a traitor. The Templar trials are a warning. Accusations of unnatural acts are weapons, wielded by enemies to destroy you. You fight harder than anyone, keep your head down, and avoid the campfire boasts about women. You're not just battling the enemy, you're battling the eyes of your own comrades. Peace is no better. In peacetime, the church tightens its grip, sniffing out sinners to restore God's order. The village becomes a cauldron of gossip, and you're the easiest target. You can't win. War exposes you to scrutiny, peace to surveillance. Every day is a performance, and the audience is merciless. You wake before dawn, check your surroundings, and plan your day to avoid suspicion. You avoid certain places, the tavern, the market square, the churchyard where lovers linger. You avoid certain people, the priest, the gossiping baker, the Lord's steward with his sharp eyes. You don't relax, don't laugh freely, don't love openly. Every smile is calculated, every word weighed. The church says God sees all, and you feel his eyes, or the villages, boring into you. You're 30, but you feel 60. The fear has carved lines into your face, hunched your shoulders, stolen your sleep. Your hands tremble, not from work, but from the weight of secrets. Your heart races at every knock on the door. You've seen friends vanish, exiled, tortured, burned, and you know you could be next. Your body is a map of survival, scarred by the effort to stay hidden. But your spirit, that's different. Despite the fear, the shame, the endless hiding, you resist. You love, even when it's dangerous. You connect, even when it's forbidden. You steal moments of joy, however fleeting, because you refuse to let the world grind you to nothing. You're not just a victim. You're a fighter, a survivor, a rebel in a world that demands conformity. You don't wear a crown or wield a sword, you don't lead armies or build cathedrals, but you're here, and that's a triumph. You love in secret, live in shadows, and survive in a world that wants you gone. The history books won't sing your name, no bard will tell your tale, but every stolen kiss, every hidden vow, every moment you dared to be yourself, that's your legacy. The world moves on, oblivious to your struggle. The church preaches, the villages gossip, the laws tighten. But you're not alone. Others like you exist, scattered across cities and fields, carving out their own secret lives. You're part of a silent community, a thread of defiance woven into history's tapestry. You don't get a statue or a song, but you get something better, the knowledge that you loved against all odds. And long after you're gone, that love lingers. It's in the cracks of history, in the whispers of those who come after, in the slow march toward a world that might one day see you. You're not just a shadow, you're a spark, a quiet fire burning through the ages. They may bury you in an unmarked grave, but they can't bury your truth. Every heartbeat, every glance, every act of courage, that's you, still fighting, still shining, still here. You've already uncovered why it sucked to be gay in medieval times, but our adventure through the murky, marvellous Middle Ages is far from over. Tonight, we're sinking our teeth into something less philosophical and a whole lot greasier, medieval junk food. In a world without neon-lit drive-thrus, corner store chips or late-night taco stands, people still craved quick, indulgent bites. Some were pure delight, others were culinary gambles, but every single one screamed medieval grit and glory. Before we dive into this feast of history, smash that like button and hit subscribe if you're loving this journey. Drop a comment below, tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's wild to imagine who's out there, from Tokyo to Texas, joining us in this time-travelling tavern. Now, light a candle, crank up a fan for that cozy hum, and let's wander into a world where snacks were as bold as the people who ate them. Picture a time when most food was a gamble, spoiled, sour, or just plain sad. Yet, amidst the chaos, apple fritters shone like edible gold, warm, sweet, and packing just enough thrill to make you forget your troubles. These weren't your fluffy frosted donuts. They were medieval street food, rugged and real. The recipe? Apples, sure, but not the pristine wax kind you'd find today. These were gnarly, tart little things plucked from wild trees behind the blacksmith's shop, or liberated from a neighbour's orchard. Chopped roughly, they were folded into a thick batter of flour, eggs, and often ale, because water was a health hazard, and ale added a cheeky buzz. The mix was plunged into a cauldron of sizzling fat, usually pork lard, recycled so many times it could tell stories. What emerged was a crispy golden orb, soft and apple-packed inside, with a faint threat of scalding your mouth if you bit too soon. For the elite, a dusting of imported sugar was a power move, flaunting wealth in every grain. For the rest, a swirl of honey or a spiced syrup, maybe clove or saffron if the market was kind, did the trick. Either way, fritters were sweet enough to drown out the memory of your daily porridge, which was mostly barley and despair. You'd snatch one at a bustling fair, post-church on Sunday, or during a market day when the air hummed with haggling and hope. Kids chased vendors for them, adults savoured them slowly, and stray dogs circled like tiny furry bandits. Fritters were joy on the go, grease soaking into your tunic as you shrugged off the turnip stew waiting at home. Sure, sometimes the apples were too sour, the batter too dense, or the fat a bit too flavourful, but when they hit, right? One bite, and you'd swear the Middle Ages weren't half bad. They were the kind of snack that made you pause, smile, and feel, just for a moment, like life was sweet. If apple fritters were the medieval donut, cheese curds were the unsung heroes, like popcorn with a rustic edge, small, squeaky, and wildly inconsistent. These weren't your melty mozzarella sticks or stretchy pizza toppings. They were humble, unpretentious, and perfect in their simplicity. Medieval cheese wasn't about aesthetics, it was churned out fast, devoured faster, and built to endure long treks, shoddy storage, and the occasional cow-stepping on it. Cheese curds were the fresh, newborn stage of cheese, before it hardened into a wheel you could use to fend off wolves. Made by curdling milk with rennet, sourced from a young animal's stomach, which sounds grim but worked like magic, these curds were pressed, salted, and ready to eat. They could be creamy, rubbery, or squeak against your teeth like they had opinions. But they were hearty, portable, and deeply satisfying. In an era when snacks were often stale crusts or watery gruel, curds were a small triumph. Monks nibbled them during long prayers, travellers tucked them into satchels, and kids popped them like candy, when the dairy gods were kind, that is. You could fry them for a crispy treat, crumble them into stews for extra heft, or munch them raw, ignoring the faint whiff of barnyard. Unlike most medieval foods, curds didn't wait for a feast or a saint's day. They were everyday comfort, chewy, reliable, and just indulgent enough to lift your spirits. Did they sometimes taste a bit funky? Absolutely. Freshness was more a suggestion than a rule, but a pinch of salt and a willing heart masked most sins. In a world without cold storage, you adapted or went hungry. Curds weren't glamorous, but they were honest, filling, and versatile. They were the snack you shared with a friend, tossed to a stray cat, or used to bribe a cranky toddler. Simple, sturdy, and quietly brilliant, cheese curds were medieval snacking done right. Now let's be real, turnips have no business being dessert, but in a time when sugar was rarer than a unicorn, apples weren't always ripe, and hunger fueled wild ideas. Someone gazed at a turnip and whispered, "What if? Pie?" And so, the turnip pie was born, a dish that wasn't always awful, and sometimes, against all odds, pretty tasty. Picture mashed turnips, hopefully tender, blended with a bit of egg and, if the stars aligned, a drizzle of honey or a handful of dried fruit. This mix was encased in a tough crust of flour, water, and sheer determination, then baked until it was edible, or at least convincing. At its peak, it was warm, faintly sweet, with a cozy, earthy charm, like a root vegetable dreaming of better days. At its nadir, it tasted like someone mistook pig feed for pastry filling, and served it with a smile. Turnip pies thrived for two reasons. Turnips were cheaper than dirt, and a crust could hide a multitude of culinary crimes. Bitter, overripe or half-cooked turnips, bury them in dough, sweeten the deal with honey, and call it peasant chic. It wasn't a velvety custard tart, but it tried, and in medieval Europe, effort was half the battle. You'd find these pies at village fairs, on monastery tables where monks had surplus root crops, or at feasts where the host wanted to stretch the budget. Some recipes tossed in spices, nutmeg for the rich, pepper for the daring, or even raisins, which only deepened the confusion. Nobles rarely touched turnip pie unless they were slumming it for clout or pandering to the masses. For commoners, it was dessert, sort of, more like a pastry-wrapped compromise. Yet, it endured. People didn't loathe it enough to abandon it, and its cheap, filling, mildly sweet nature made it a quiet revolution. It was the underdog of medieval sweets, proof that even a humble turnip could shine with enough creativity and crust. If medieval snacks had a heavyweight champ, it was the meat pasty, a handheld pie stuffed with spiced meat, sealed in a rugged crust, and baked until golden or slightly singed. Imagine a medieval calzone, minus the oven timer and plus a hint of adventure. Its brilliance lay in its portability. You could eat it on a dusty road, in a muddy field, or while watching a joust. No plate required. The thick pastry shell kept the filling warm and safe from dirt, rats, or a passing cough. But the meat inside? That was a wild card. Near a lord's hunting grounds, you might score pork, mutton, or venison, proper brag-worthy meat. Elsewhere, the definition stretched to include rabbit, pigeon, eel, or even hedgehog, diced and spiced to obscure any uniqueness. Pepper, sage, or garlic worked wonders, though they couldn't always hide meat that had lingered a tad too long. Still, in an age when lunch was often bread and a prayer, a meat pasty felt like a feast. There were meatless versions for Lent, packed with leeks, carrots, or cheese, but the carnivorous ones ruled. Greasy, warm and soul-warming, they were the snack you didn't overthink, just ate, hoping the cook wasn't holding a grudge. Some pasties bore carved initials to mark ownership, especially among miners or labourers. In certain regions, one edge was extra thick, meant to be gripped by filthy hands and discarded to appease spirits, or feed the rats. Were they delicious? Often. Mysterious? Always. That was the allure. You didn't eat a pasty for certainty, you ate it for joy, ready to face whatever medieval life tossed your way. It was a pocket of comfort in a world that rarely offered any. In an era where oral hygiene meant a splash of ale and blind optimism, candied fennel seeds were the medieval equivalent of breath mints, tiny, sugary, and packing a herbal punch, with a crunch that could test your molars. These seeds were coated in a hard sugar shell, a feat when sugar was hauled from distant lands and cost a fortune. Boiled, beaten, and moulded by hand, they were a labour-intensive treat, beloved in noble homes. After a feast of roasted boar and mead, guests were offered a dish of these to freshen their breath and mask the lingering mutton. Fennel's bold, licorice-like flavour was a love-it-or-hate-it affair. You either savoured the zing or choked it down with a polite nod. The sugar tamed it, but that herbal kick still lingered, making you feel fancy yet slightly baffled. Beyond taste, fennel was thought to soothe the stomach, a godsend after heavy meals. Picture them as medieval gum crossed with Tums, but with a real risk of dental damage. Hard as pebbles, they demanded a cautious bite, a slow chew, and a prayer for your teeth. The wealthy popped them like candy. Commoners made do with honey-dipped herb imposters. In the grand tapestry of medieval snacks, candied fennel seeds were small but mighty, offering a fleeting whiff of refinement even if you were caked in mud and smelling of the stable. The crown jewel of medieval desserts was the honey cake, a dense, sticky masterpiece born in a world where sugar was a noble's privilege. Honey was the people's sweetener, if you had bees or the nerve to wrestle a hive. Crafted from flour, water, and heaps of honey, these cakes were chewy, hearty slabs that could double as a snack or a shield, depending on how long they'd sat by the fire. Spices like cinnamon, cloves, or nutmeg added flair if you were showing off. Dried fruits like figs or currants brought texture if they hadn't been pilfered by hungry kids. Honey cakes were stars at weddings, harvest festivals, or feasts, since they kept well, survived rough handling, and could endure a drunken brawl or two. They were also gifts, bribes, or subtle jabs. Here's a sweet cake, unlike your sour mood. Slicing one took a sturdy blade and some muscle. Eating was simpler, though not light. Built for medieval life, tough, durable, sticky, they tasted like rare indulgence, a reprieve from chewing salted oats or dodging pantry pests. They were joy in edible form, with enough chew to count as exercise. Honey cakes weren't delicate, but they didn't need to be. They were warmth, sweetness, and a reminder that even in hard times, life could taste good. Fried fish skin cracklings were the dark horse of medieval snacks, a stroke of genius from a culture that also served eel stew without blinking. These crispy, salty strips weren't much to look at, but they turned waste into wonder. Born from necessity, likely when a thrifty cook stared at fish guts and thought, "Let's fry that," they became a staple in coastal towns and river hamlets. After filleting cod, herring, or whatever swam by, the meat went to pots, heads to cats, and skins to a pan of hot oil. The result? A feather-light crunch with a bold, sea-salted flavour, like the ocean distilled into a bite. A sprinkle of salt was standard, a dash of garlic or dill was artistry. Lightweight, fatty, and near indestructible, they were perfect for soldiers on the march, sailors at sea, or peasants peddling them outside alehouses for a few coins and some laughs. Scales still attached? Sometimes. Oddly curled shapes? Sure, but by medieval standards they were elegant, flavourful, low risk for food poisoning, and practical. The downside? The smell. Fry a batch indoors and your home reeked like a mermaid's laundry for a week. Yet, the taste made it worth it, a crispy, addictive treat that proved even fish scraps could steal the show. When life handed you stale bread and sour ale, you didn't complain, you made ale-soaked bread. Known as sops, or trench toast, the original medieval comfort food. Think French toast, stripped to its gritty core. No syrup, no eggs, just survival. You'd take bread so hard it could break a tooth, and dunk it in ale, not some hoppy craft brew, but the flat, low-alcohol stuff brewed in a neighbour's smoky shed. The bread drank it up grudgingly, softening into something you could chew without a fight. Was it good? With low expectations and a warm hearth, absolutely. It was bready, warm, with a bitter ale tang that didn't insult your taste buds. Loved by labourers with no time for fancy meals, it was quick, hearty, and messy enough to feel like a break. Some added herbs, cheese, or a fried egg if the hens were cooperative. On feast days, spiced ale turned it festive. It stretched every scrap. Stale bread? Soak it. Ale turning? Pour it on. Waste was for the weak. The catch? It sogged up fast, turning into a sludgy mess if you dawdled. But by a winter fire, this ale-bread mush was pure solace. A hug in food form. If you've ever thought bread might taste better tipsy, you'd vibe with medieval nobles, who adored sops in wine. This peculiar dessert was less a recipe, more a performance. Take bread, ideally toasted, not mouldy, and soak it in mulled wine, spiced with cloves or cinnamon and sweetened with honey, the kind that lingered in a jug since last harvest. Served soft and spoonable, it was a refined treat, savoured slowly at banquets while lutes droned in the background. Done well, it was warm, fragrant, and faintly boozy, with wine lending depth and spices sparking joy. Done poorly? It was wet bread, no amount of saffron could redeem. Nobles called it sophisticated. Servants likely thought the kitchen had given up. Some versions added nuts, dried fruit, or cheese. Others tossed in eggs, turning it into a culinary riddle. Peasants made do with ale or vinegar-soaked knockoffs. Less dessert, more necessity. Still, sops in wine were cosy, filling, and felt like a splurge, even if they tasted like spiced sog. In the smoky, mud-caked world of the Middle Ages, snacks weren't just food. They were tiny rebellions against hunger, hardship, and the relentless grind of life. Forget the sterile convenience of modern vending machines or neatly packaged granola bars. These were morsels born from necessity, ingenuity, and the occasional stroke of decadence, each carrying the weight of its time. From the chewy defiance of dried fruit to the bold, bloody bite of pudding balls, medieval snacks were as much about survival as they were about flavour. Let's dive into the gritty, greasy, and sometimes glorious world of what people munched on in 1275. When every bite was a small victory over a world that didn't care if you starved. Dried fruit was the medieval world's answer to candy, tough, sweet, and built to outlast a pilgrimage or a siege. These weren't the soft, sugary treats of today nestled in plastic bags with expiration dates. Raisins, figs, dates and prunes were sun-baked or smoked over smouldering fires until they shriveled into dense, wrinkled nuggets that could survive a winter or a march to Jerusalem. The process was brutal. Fruits left to wither under a merciless sun or hung in smoky huts, their sugars condensing into a sticky, intense sweetness that hit like a revelation. To a peasant, a single fig was a treasure. its gritty seeds crunching like tiny pebbles between teeth worn down by coarse bread. Dates, sticky and caramel-like, clung to your jaw, demanding a slow, deliberate chew that felt like a workout. Raisins, small but mighty, lodged in your molars like uninvited guests, their tart sweetness lingering long after the last bite. For nobles, dried fruit was a status symbol, hoarded in locked chests alongside spices and silver. A lord might toss a prune to a favoured squire, a rare gesture of generosity that sparked envy among the household. Children, meanwhile, would brawl in the dirt over a single raisin, their small fists flying for a taste of sweetness in a world of turnips and gruel. Monks, ever the hypocrites, preached austerity while slipping figs under their robes, savouring them in the dim glow of a scriptorium candle. These fruits weren't just eaten, they were woven into the fabric of medieval life. Cooks chopped them into potages, their sweetness cutting through the monotony of barley and grease. Bakers folded them into dense honey cakes for feast days, each bite a fleeting escape from the daily grind. Nobles soaked them in wine, a decadent flourish that screamed wealth, while peasants savoured them plain, rationing each piece to make the joy last. Storage was an art form. Dried fruit was packed into coarse cloth sacks or clay jars, sealed with wax, tucked away in cellars or under floorboards to keep them from greedy hands or thieving rats. They lasted years, hardening into leathery pellets that could double as slingshot ammo in a pinch. A merchant might carry a pouch of dates on a trade route, their portability a lifeline when inns ran dry of food. Yet, every bite was a gamble. Mould could creep in, or a stray pebble could crack a tooth. Still, dried fruit was a sticky slice of luxury, a reminder that even in a world of mud and misery, sweetness could endure. You'd chew slowly, the flavour blooming like a memory of summer, and for a moment, the cold, the hunger, and the endless labour faded away. If dried fruit was a treat, blood pudding balls were a dare, a dark, dense snack that laughed in the face of modern squeamishness. Born from the medieval mantra of wasting nothing, these were the ultimate nose-to-tail triumph. Picture a butcher slaughtering a pig, its blood caught in a wooden bucket, still warm and steaming in the chilly air. That blood, thick and iron-rich, was mixed with oats, diced onions, suet fat, and a pinch of herbs, thyme or sage if you were lucky, then shaped into fist-sized orbs and fried in sizzling lard until the outside crisped to a golden black. The flavour was a punch, earthy, slightly sweet from the onions, with a metallic tang that lingered like a whispered secret. Hot from the pan, they were divine, the crust crackling under your teeth, the insides soft and savoury. Gold, they were a challenge, dense as a stone and daring you to complain. These weren't snacks for the faint-hearted. Nobles might pair them with a sprinkle of precious pepper or a boiled egg, elevating them to a delicacy served at feasts. Peasants, on the other hand, ate them with gratitude, thankful for anything that wasn't another bowl of turnip pottage. Blood pudding balls were calorie bombs, packed with energy to fuel a day of ploughing fields or hauling wood. They were portable too, tucked into a cloth and carried to market or slipped into a soldier's pack for a long march. Their dark, glossy surface hid a world of flavour, but also a truth. In the Middle Ages, survival meant embracing the grim. A squeamish eater didn't last long when famine loomed or harvests failed. You'd bite into one, the iron taste coating your tongue, and feel a strange pride. Every chew was proof you could stomach the world's harshness. Making them was a ritual. The blood had to be fresh, stirred to keep it from clotting, often by a child tasked with the messy job. The mixture was kneaded by hand, the cook's fingers stained red, and the balls were fried in a communal cauldron, the air thick with the smell of fat and char. Some added barley or breadcrumbs to stretch the batch, others tossed in garlic or wild herbs foraged from the woods. They were a staple at slaughter time, when every village turned a pig's death into a week's worth of meals. Not everyone loved them. Monks debated their morality during fasts, and some turned up their noses at the bloody origins. But in a world where hunger was a constant shadow, these balls were legends, a testament to ingenuity and grit. Modern pancakes are fluffy clouds, doused in syrup and served with a side of leisure. Medieval pancakes were warriors, thin, tough, and fried in enough lard to make your heart skip a beat just looking at them. Made from a simple batter of coarse flour, eggs, and ale or water, they were poured onto a smoking hot griddle greased with pork fat or butter. The result was a chewy, golden disc with crispy, blackened edges that could survive a week in a pilgrim's satchel or a day in a peasant's pocket. These weren't delicate. They were built to endure, like the people who ate them. Burnt spots were a feature, not a flaw, adding a smoky crunch that paired with whatever you could scrounge. A drizzle of honey for the lucky, a smear of sour ale for the desperate, or a scattering of fried onions for those who leaned into the grit. Everyone ate them, peasants hunched over a fire, knights on campaign, monks sneaking them during Lent when fish got old. They were versatile, rolled around a scrap of cheese or folded over a spoonful of pottage. On fasting days, when meat was forbidden, pancakes were a loophole, smuggling flavour in their chewy folds. Cooks got creative, tossing in mashed turnips, herbs, or even dried fruit if they could steal it from the Lord's stores. The batter was forgiving, hiding gritty flour or questionable eggs with the confidence of a seasoned con artist. You'd tear into one, the grease coating your fingers, and feel a stubborn satisfaction. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep you going. Stacked like shields or rolled like scrolls, these pancakes were the unsung heroes of the medieval table, filling bellies with a charm that didn't need to be pretty. Making them was a communal affair. In a village, women gathered around a shared griddle, the fire's heat reddening their faces as they poured batter and swapped gossip. In castles, kitchen maids churned them out by the dozen, their arms aching from stirring and flipping. The smell, lard, ale and char, filled the air, a promise of something warm in a world that was often cold. They weren't glamorous, but they didn't need to be. A pancake in your hand meant you'd eat today, and in the Middle Ages that was a victory worth savouring. Wafers were the ethereal ghosts of medieval snacks, crisp, delicate biscuits that danced on the edge of sacred and indulgent. Crafted from a thin batter of flour, water, eggs, and sometimes a whisper of honey, they were pressed between hot iron moulds, etched with images of saints, crosses, or twining vines. The irons, heated over an open fire, hissed as the batter cooked, releasing a faint sweetness that cut through the ever-present smell of smoke and sweat. The result was a wafer so thin it shattered under a careless bite, its surface golden and crisp, its texture light as a prayer. Sold by vendors outside churches or hawked at bustling fairs, they were the medieval equivalent of a quick snack. Cheap, portable, and gone in moments, leaving only crumbs and a fleeting sense of joy. Nobles ate them with flair, pairing them with sliced apples, soft cheese, or a drizzle of imported wine, turning a simple biscuit into a display of wealth. Peasants, meanwhile, scarfed them plain, crunching through them before they crumbled into dust or were snatched by a passing crow. Monks loved them too, slipping them into their sleeves during long sermons, though they'd swear it was for spiritual contemplation. Wafers were festive, tied to holy days and markets, their lightness a rare break from the heavy grind of pottage and bread. They were fragile, sure, but that was their charm. Each bite felt like stealing a moment of grace from a world that offered little. You'd crunch through one, the faint honeyed sweetness blooming on your tongue, and for a second, the mud, the cold, and the endless labour faded away. Storage was tricky. Wafers were kept in wooden boxes or wrapped in cloth, but they turned stale or soggy in the damp medieval air. Vendors sold them fresh, their cries mingling with the clamour of church bells and haggling merchants. Making them was a craft. Irons were heirlooms, passed down through families, their patterns a point of pride. In monasteries, monks pressed them for communion, blurring the line between snack and sacrament. Wafers were a reminder that even in a world of hardship, a little beauty could slip through the cracks, as fleeting and fragile as the biscuits themselves. Sucket was medieval decadence distilled into a single syrupy bite, a fruit preserved in such lavish sweetness it could make a king blush. Oranges, ginger, quinces, or dates were boiled in honey or rare imported sugar until they glistened like jewels, their flavours intensified to a toothacheing crescendo. This wasn't just food, it was a flex, a way for nobles to flaunt their wealth at feasts where every dish screamed privilege. The process was labour-intensive. Fruits peeled and simmered in bubbling cauldrons, the air thick with the heady scent of citrus and spice. Once preserved, Sucket was packed into earthenware jars or cut into sticky cubes, sometimes dusted with sugar crystals that sparkled like frost. Each bite was chewy, intense, and so sweet it made your jaw ache, a burst of flavour that lingered like a forbidden kiss. For nobles, sucket was a centerpiece, served in silver bowls to impress foreign envoys or seduce a betrothed. A single piece could cost more than a peasant's yearly wages, its rarity a reminder of the chasm between rich and poor. Commoners might catch a whiff at a lord's banquet, their mouths watering as they cleared plates they'd never taste. A lucky servant might sneak a lick of syrup from a spoon, a fleeting taste of a world beyond their reach. Sucket wasn't just eaten, it was savoured. Each piece a small rebellion against the church's warnings about gluttony. You'd pop a cube in your mouth, the sweetness overwhelming, and feel like you'd stolen a piece of paradise. In a world of stale bread and watery ale, sucket was dessert perfected, a sticky escape from the grind. Storage was a status symbol. Jars of sucket were locked in cellars, guarded like treasure, their contents checked by stewards paranoid about theft. Some were gifted to seal alliances, others offered as bribes to sway a bishop's vote. For the few commoners who tasted it, maybe a discarded scrap at a feast, it was a revelation, a glimpse of a life they'd never live. Sucket was more than food, it was power, preserved in sugar and served with a smirk. Fried eel was the rebel king of medieval snacks, beloved from peasant fires to royal halls, a greasy, crunchy delight that thumbed its nose at propriety. Eels were everywhere, wriggling in rivers, ditches and moats, cheap and abundant enough to feed the masses. Catching them was a chore, their slimy bodies slipping through nets, their sharp teeth snapping at careless hands. Once caught, they were skinned with muttered curses, chopped into chunks and fried in sizzling fat, lard, butter, or oil if you were fancy. The result was a snack like no other, golden, crisp skin giving way to tender, oily flesh, with a savoury depth that hit like a warm hug. Bones crunched under your teeth, adding a rogue texture that modern calamari could only dream of. The flavour was rich, faintly fishy with a smoky edge from the fire. Eels were a godsend for fast days, when meat was banned but fish slipped through the church's rules. Monks ate them with relish, their greasy fingers smudging prayer books. Kings demanded them at feasts, piled high on platters with herbs and ale. Peasants fried them at market stalls, the air thick with the smell of hot fat and char, drawing crowds like moths to a flame. You'd grab a piece, still warm, and bite through the crisp skin, the oil dripping down your chin. It was messy, unapologetic joy, a snack that didn't care about your station. Nobles might pair it with wine, peasants with a swig of ale, but everyone agreed. Fried eel was a taste of life, proof that even in a world of mud and misery, flavour could reign. Making them was a ritual. Fishwives stood over cauldrons, their hands scarred from years of gutting and frying. The eels were tossed in flour or breadcrumbs, sometimes spiced with wild garlic or fennel foraged from the woods. They were eaten hot, fresh from the fire, or cold the next day, their flavour deepening as they sat. Bones were no deterrent. Medieval eaters chewed through them with the same grit they brought to life itself. Fried eel was a snack for the bold, a greasy middle finger to hunger and hardship, and every bite felt like a small, defiant victory. Medieval junk food wasn't just about filling bellies. It was a mirror of the era's ingenuity, grit, and hunger for joy. From the crispy delight of apple fritters to the daring crunch of fried eel, these snacks were born from necessity but laced with creativity. They stretched scraps into feasts, turned waste into wonders, and offered fleeting moments of indulgence in a world of toil. Cheese curds and blood pudding balls fed the body, honey cakes and sucket fed the soul. Even the humble turnip pie with its stubborn charm showed how far a crust and a dream could go. These foods weren't perfect, greasy, risky, sometimes outright weird, but they were honest. They carried the flavours of medieval life, bold, messy, and unapologetic. In every bite you tasted resilience, resourcefulness, and a quiet defiance against hardship. So, next time you grab a snack, raise a chip to those medieval munchers who found sweetness in a sour world and made every greasy morsel count. Hey everyone, tonight we're stepping into a world that's not just tough, it's a soul-crushing marathon where you're expected to sprint with a yoke on your back. Picture a medieval village, muddy lanes slick with pig slop, smoky huts that smell like damp wool and despair, church bells clanging like they're personally fed up with your existence. Now imagine you're a wife in this world. Not the storybook kind with a gallant husband and a rose-strewn bower, but the real kind, where your days are an endless grind of chores, your body's a battleground for babies and bruises, and your voice carries less weight than a stray cat's meow. This isn't a tale of hearthside coziness or courtly love. It's a brutal, bone-weary slog through a life where being a wife means being a cook, maid, nurse, farmer, and punching bag, all while the world reminds you you're worth less than the ox you feed. Forget the dreamy glow of illuminated manuscripts. Your life's a treadmill powered by duty, danger, and a society that sees you as a walking womb with a broom. So that scene features rooms with large windows and shimmering glass. So, light a rushlight, maybe gnaw on a crust of barley bread for authenticity, and let's dive into why it sucked to be a wife in medieval times. Drop a comment to tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I'm curious who's brave enough to slog through this grim journey with me. You're born in a village so small the gossip spreads faster than fleas in a famine. Life's already a kick in the shins. The air's thick with the stench of manure and wood smoke. Your bed's a straw mat that's more splinters than comfort. And your biggest ambition is surviving the next winter without your toes turning black. But as a girl, you learn early that your future's not yours to mould. You're destined to be a wife. And that's not a dream. It's a shackle bolted on before you can walk. By 5, you're trailing your mother through the muck, learning the tasks that'll chain you for life. You're hauling water from a well so cold it numbs your fingers, scrubbing pots with sand until your knuckles bleed, and stirring pottage that's more grit than grain. The boys run wild, stealing apples or wrestling in the dirt, dreaming of being knights or ploughmen, while you're stuck at the hearth, your world shrinking to the size of a smoky hut. If you don't get to climb trees or chase geese, your playground's a loom, a quern, and a pile of mending that never shrinks. Your hands are raw before you've lost your milk teeth, and your back's already learning the ache that'll be your lifelong companion. You're 7, maybe 8, when you overhear the women at the well. Their voices low but sharp. They talk of marriage like it's a tax you can't dodge. Your mother's friend, married at 13 to a man who drinks. The baker's daughter, wed to a widower with a fist like a hammer. You don't understand it all, but you feel the weight in their sighs. The way they glance at you like you're next in line for the gallows. Your mother teaches you to spin wool, her hands guiding yours, but her eyes are distant, like she's already mourning the girl you won't get to be. You learn to keep quiet, to move quick, to make yourself useful. The church looms over you, its bells dragging you to mass, where the priest drones about Eve's sin and women's duty. You're too young to grasp it fully, but you know one thing. Being a girl means being less, and being a wife means being nothing at all. By 12, the matchmaker's circling like a vulture over a sick cow. Your parents, ground down by taxes and hunger, see you as their best barter. Maybe you're promised to the miller's son, a lanky brute with a smirk that curdles your stomach, or the tanner, a grizzled widower twice your age, with 4 snot-nosed kids and a temper that flares like a forge. Love? That's a bard's lie, sung for nobles who can afford dreams. Your marriage is a deal, sealed with a dowry of a few pennies, a patched cloak, or a scrawny pig. You don't get a vote, your father grunts his approval, your mother wipes her eyes, and you're sent to a new hut where you're expected to be everything. Wife, mother, cook, spinner, healer, and saint, all before you're old enough to know who you are. You're a child, but the world's decided you're a beast of burden in a kirtle. Welcome to your life. Hope you like scrubbing floors, swallowing tears, and praying for miracles that never come. Your new home's a drafty hovel with a dirt floor that turns to mud when it rains. The roof leaks, the walls are soot back, and the hearth's your only light, spitting smoke that stings your eyes and clings to your hair. Your husband, whether he's a young lout or an old grump, expects you to make it a palace. You're up before the sun, coaxing embers into flame with fingers numb from cold, holding water from a well half a mile off, your arms screaming under the bucket's weight. You grind grain by hand, the quern's rough stone chewing your palms raw, turning barley into flour that's more sand than sustenance. Breakfast is pottage, thin as gruel, with a few wilted herbs if you're lucky. You eat last, scraping the pot after your husband, his kin, and maybe a stray dog get their share. Then it's spinning wool until your fingers cramp, mending tunics torn by his drunken stumbles, and weeding the garden, where the turnips fight harder to survive than you do. You milk the cow, chase chickens that would rather starve than lay, and barter eggs at market for a scrap of salt or a candle stub. Your day's a blur of tasks, each one bleeding into the next with no pause until you collapse onto your straw mat, praying the baby's wail doesn't drag you back to your feet. Your husband's word is law, and the law's not kind. He owns you, your body, your labour, your very thoughts under laws that call you his chattel, no different from his plough or his pig. If he beats you, and most do, the village looks away. It's his right to chasten his wife. You learn to flinch at his raised voice, to hide bruises under your shawl, to keep your head down when he stumbles home reeking of ale and resentment. If he gambles away your last coin or beds the tavern maid, it's your fault for not pleasing him. If you dare glance at another man, it's adultery, a crime that means public shaming, a whipping or worse. You hear of women in nearby towns, stripped and paraded for harlotry, their lives ruined while their lovers shrug and move on. You don't dream of love, you barely dream at all. Your nights are spent dreading his touch, his temper, or the next mouth you'll have to feed. The church is your master as much as he is. Its bells wake you, its sermons shame you, its rules bind you tighter than your apron strings. You're taught that Eve doomed womankind, that your role is to submit, serve, and suffer. The priest quotes St. Paul, "Wives, be subject to your husbands as to the Lord." You sit in the pew, hands clasped, feeling those words like a stone on your chest. If your husband drinks, it's your fault for not praying hard enough. If you're barren, you're cursed, a failure in God's eyes. If you speak out, you're a scold, tempting Satan with your tongue. You pray for patience, not freedom, because freedom's a sin you can't afford. The church says your suffering is holy, your silence divine, but it feels like a cage, and the key's been thrown into the river. Your body's a battlefield, and you're losing. By 16 you're pregnant, your belly swelling while you still scrub floors and churn butter. Childbirth is a roll of the dice with death. No doctors, no medicine, just a midwife with herbs and prayers, and your mother-in-law barking orders like you're a cow in the barn. The pain's a white-hot beast, hours of screaming in a stifling hut, with half the village women crowding round judging your cries. If the baby lives, you're back at the hearth in days, the newborn strapped to your back while you knead dough, your body still bleeding, your breasts aching. If it dies, you bury it in silence, your husband's cold stare blaming you for failing him. 1 in 3 babies doesn't make it, many mothers follow. You're 20 and you've buried 2 children, each loss carving a hole in your heart. But you're pregnant again because your husband wants sons and the church says your body's not yours to refuse. You're not just a wife, you're the village's spine, though nobody admits it. You brew ale that keeps the men drunk, tend pigs that keep them fed, and stitch clothes that outlast their fights. You're nurse when the plague sweeps through, cooling fevered brows while risking your own life. You're accountant, stretching every penny to pay the Lord's taxes, even when your husband spends your earnings on dice. You're farmer, coaxing turnips from rocky soil, and merchant, haggling at market for a scrap of cloth or a pinch of spice. The Lord's castle stands because of your labour, your bread feeds his men, your wool clothes them, your children grow to serve him. But when the village sings anyone's praise, it's the knight's courage, the priest's wisdom, or the miller's fat sheep. You're just the wife, a shadow who keeps the world turning while it pretends you don't exist. You find flickers of joy, stolen like crumbs from the Lord's table. Maybe it's gossip at the well, where the other wives trade stories, their laughter a brief shield against the grind. Maybe it's a festival, where you dance under torchlight, your husband too soused to notice your smile. Maybe it's your children, their sticky hands tugging your skirt, their giggles a fleeting light before they're sent to the fields or wed off. But joy's a fragile thing, crushed by duty's weight. You envy the men with their tavern nights and loud voices, or the nuns, cloistered but free from husbands' fists. You're neither. You're bound to a hearth that burns you out, a life that demands your all and gives nothing back. By 30, you're a husk of the girl you were. Your hands are calloused claws, cracked from spinning and scrubbing. Your back's a knot of pain, stooped from hauling water and babes. Your face is lined from worry, smoke and sun. Your eyes dim from years of dim huts and late-night mending. You've birthed 7 children, buried 4, miscarried more than you can count. Your teeth wobble, your joints creak, and your hair's thinning under your coif. You've survived fevers, famines, and your husband's temper, but each leaves a mark. Sleep's a cruel jest, broken by crying babies, creaking floors, or your own racing thoughts. Did you save enough grain? Mend his hose? Pray hard enough to keep the plague at bay? You smell of sweat, ash, and desperation, no matter how you scrub. You're not a woman, you're a machine, cooking, cleaning, bearing, breaking, until you're ground to dust. Yet you keep going because there's no other way. You find strength in the other wives, their knowing glances at market, their shared grumbles over spinning wheels. You teach your daughters to endure, not to hope, passing down the bitter wisdom of silence and survival. You're not celebrated, not remembered. No chronicle notes your dawn-to-dusk toil, no bard sings of your pottage or your mended cloaks, but every loaf on the table, every child who grows, every fire that burns, that's you. The world spins on your work, though it'll never say so. They may bury you in a pauper's grave, no marker but a worn stone, but every meal shared, every hearth kindled, every life you held together, that's your legacy, quiet but unyielding, in a world that tried to crush you. You're not just surviving, you're carrying a village on your back, though it'll never thank you. You brew ale in a cauldron so heavy it pulls your shoulders out of joint, stirring until your arms scream, knowing if it sours, your husband's fist will find you before the customers do. You tend the garden, kneeling in mud to pull weeds, your skirts soaked and heavy, praying the cabbages don't rot before winter. You shear sheep, your hands slick with grease, dodging hooves that could crack your skull, because wool means coin, and coin means the Lord won't seize your hut. You're up at midnight, rocking a fevered child, your eyes burning from lack of sleep, while your husband snores, oblivious. You're the one who barters at market, your voice hoarse from haggling, knowing a bad deal means hunger by spring. You're the one who patches the roof with straw, balancing on a rickety ladder, wind tearing at your coif, because leaks mean ruined grain and a husband's rage. The law's a boot on your neck. You can't own land, can't testify in court, can't leave your husband no matter how he hurts you. If he dies, you're a widow, but that's no freedom. Your land goes to his kin, and you're left begging, or remarrying a man who's likely worse. If you're a town wife, maybe you run a shop selling cloth or bread, but every penny's his, and the guild men sneer at your woman's work. If you're a noble wife, your life softer, silk gowns, not sackcloth. But you're still a pawn, married off to seal alliances, your body a bargaining chip for heirs. You're watched, judged, expected to birth sons while your lord husband hunts, feasts, or beds his mistresses. Peasant or lady, your property, your worth measured in babies, obedience, and how well you keep the hearth. Childbirth is your crucible, and it's relentless. You're pregnant again before your last babe can walk, your body still aching from the one before. The village midwife's your only help, her hands rough but kind, muttering charms against the demons that steal mothers and babes. You labour in a hut thick with smoke and fear, gripping a rope tied to the rafters, your screams echoing off the walls, the pains a beast, tearing you apart, and the women around you, sisters, cousins, neighbours, chant prayers or scold you to push harder. If the babes breach, if you bleed too much, if the fever comes, you're gone, and the village will shrug. Another wife will take your place. If you survive, you're back to work in a week, the babe swaddled on your back, your breasts leaking through your kirtle as you churn butter or card wool. You're 25, and you've buried 3 babes, each grave a piece of your soul. But you're pregnant again, because your husband's will and the church's law leave no room for rest. You're the village's heart, though it'll never admit it. You feed the men who plough the fields, clothe the children who herd the geese, nurse the sick when plague creeps in. You're the one who keeps the fire burning, the one who stretches a single hen to feed 6 mouths, the one who mends boots so your husband can work another day. The Lord's taxes bite deep, and you're the one who counts the coins, hiding a few under the hearthstone, praying it's enough to keep the bailiff at bay. When famine comes, You're the one who boils nettles into soup, who chews crusts to feed your babes, who starves so they don't. When war calls the men away, you're the one who takes up the plough, your arms shaking, your skirts hitched, because the fields don't wait. The village stands because of you, but when the priest preaches or the Lord feasts, it's the men who get the glory. You're just the wife, the shadow that keeps the light burning. You've already peeled back the curtain on why it sucked to be gay in medieval times and savoured the gritty delights of medieval junk food, but our plunge into the Middle Ages keeps rolling. Tonight, we're stepping into a world of tattered homespun, shimmering silks and head-turning headgear, medieval fashion. In an era without Zara, sewing machines or fashion blogs, clothing was more than style. It was a loud declaration of who you were, what you had, and how you survived. Some garments were built for toil, others screamed wealth, but every stitch carried the raw pulse of medieval life. Before we unravel this vibrant tapestry, smash that like button and subscribe if you're hooked on this time travel adventure. Drop a comment below. Where are you tuning in from and what's the clock saying? It's wild to picture folks from Melbourne to Montreal joining us in this medieval wardrobe raid. Now, light a candle, wrap yourself in something cozy, and let's wander through a world where fashion was as fierce as the people who wore it. In a time when your outfit could mean the difference between respect and ruin, tunics were the medieval equivalent of a trusty pair of jeans, universal, practical, and endlessly adaptable. From peasants toiling in fields to knights sweating under armour, everyone wore tunics. These knee-length garments, crafted from wool or linen, cotton was a distant dream, were cut loose for ease, letting you move through a world of ploughs, swords, and muddy streets. For the poor, tunics were rough, undyed, and patched to oblivion in shades of dirt brown, ash grey, or faded beige, colours that mirrored their labour-soaked lives. Wool was warm, but scratched like a penance. Linen was breezy but pricier and prone to creases. Men paired tunics with hose, snug leggings tied to a belt, while women layered them over long skirts or tied on aprons for endless chores. Fastenings were simple. A leather belt cinched the waist, maybe a wooden toggle or bone pin if you had a bit of flair. For peasants, a tunic was your everything. Workwear, sleepwear, and Sunday best, washed once in a blue moon and worn until it unravelled into rags. Wealthier folks, like merchants or minor gentry, had finer tunics, dyed in soft greens, muted blues, or earthy ochres, with delicate embroidery at the collar or cuffs, just enough to say, "I've got coin, but I'm not a lord." Tunics weren't just clothes, they were your story. Mud stains marked a farmer, flour dusted a baker, and frayed hems whispered of a mother's relentless mending. Cloth was precious, spun and woven by hand, so every tunic was a survivor, patched, resized, or handed down to kids, siblings, or servants. They weren't flashy, but they were honest, wrapping medieval life in sturdy, lived-in threads that carried the weight of daily grind and quiet resilience. If tunics were the backbone of medieval wardrobes, surcoats were the bold outer layer that turned heads and shouted status. Originally designed for knights to protect armour from dust and sun, these sleeveless, flowing garments became a fashion staple for nobles, merchants, and even ambitious townsfolk by the 12th century. Picture a long, elegant vest, often reaching the knees or ankles, worn over a tunic for warmth and swagger. Made from wool or linen for the practical, or silk and velvet for the privileged, surcoats were a canvas for wealth. Nobles flaunted rich dyes, crimson from madder, sapphire from indigo, or emerald from woad, colours that took time, trade, and coin to create. Fur trim like ermine or fox or gold thread embroidery added opulence, each detail a quiet boast of connections to far-off markets. Women's surcoats had wide armholes, revealing the tight-sleeved kirtle beneath, creating a layered look that balanced modesty with allure. Men's were shorter, slit at the sides for riding, but no less bold, often emblazoned with heraldic crests or geometric patterns. For commoners, a surcoat was a rare treat, maybe dyed with cheap herbs or left plain, worn to church or a festival to feel a notch above the everyday. Surcoats weren't just fashion, they were social armour. A knight's bore his family's shield, a merchant's hinted at trade routes, a lady's signalled her marriage prospects. They were versatile too, flip them inside out to hide stains, wear them loose to conceal a pregnancy, or drape them for dramatic entrances. In a world obsessed with rank, surcoats let you wear your worth whether you were gliding through a castle hall or haggling in a village square. They flowed with purpose, catching eyes and whispering power. Headgear was non-negotiable in the Middle Ages. Your head was a stage, and hoods were the starring act. Think of them as the medieval hoodie. Cozy, practical, and loaded with personality. Worn by everyone from shepherds to dukes, hoods were crafted from wool or linen, shielding against rain, wind, and nosy neighbours. Peasants wore simple, undyed hoods, often sewn to a cape-like chaperon for extra coverage, perfect for trudging through sleet or shielding wares at market. They were loose, with a long tail called a liripipe that dangled like a quirky accessory or wrapped like a scarf for warmth. Wealthier folks had hoods in vivid hues, scarlet, mustard, or teal, lined with rabbit fur or silk, sometimes stitched with tiny floral motifs or monograms. By the 14th century, hoods got downright theatrical. Liripipes stretched to absurd lengths, trailing like fabric comets, and fashionable men draped them artfully over shoulders or twisted them into makeshift turbans. Women tucked their hair into hoods, often paired with veils for modesty, though younger ladies might let a braid slip out for a touch of charm. Hoods weren't just about weather, they were social signals. A pulled-up hood said, "Leave me alone." A pushed-back one invited chatter. They doubled as pillows on long treks or sacks for carrying bread home. Sure, they soaked through in storms and reeked of sweat after a hard day, but in a world without Gore-Tex or heaters, a hood was your lifeline. From a farmer shielding his face from hail to a noble flaunting his fur-lined finesse, hoods wrapped medieval heads in comfort, character, and a dash of mystery. For women, veils were a cultural cornerstone, weaving together faith, status, and subtle defiance. Worn by maidens, wives, and widows, veils ranged from humble linen squares to ethereal silk masterpieces. Peasant women draped plain, undyed veils over their hair, pinned or knotted to stay put while kneading dough or chasing pigs. These were practical, keeping hair from fires or flour, but also marked respectability. An unveiled woman risked whispers of loose moral. Noble women turned veils into poetry. Theirs were crafted from fine muslin or silk, imported from Venice or Damascus, dyed in pale rose, ivory, or sky pule, often edged with gold thread or tiny pearls. By the 13th century, veils grew elaborate, layered with wimples, cloth bands framing the face and neck, or crowned with delicate circlets of silver or braided silk. Some trailed to the floor, a logistical nightmare but a loud signal of wealth. Only the elite could afford fabric that did nothing but look divine. Sheer veils played with modesty, hinting at beauty beneath while staying church-approved, letting a lady obey sermons while catching suitors' eyes. Nuns and widows wore heavy, stark veils, signalling devotion or grief, but younger women added flair with jeweled pins, embroidered borders, or artful draping. Veils evolved with time, shorter for travel, longer for ceremonies, always shifting with fashion and faith. A peasant's veil was mended until it frayed, a lady's was swapped with the seasons. In a world where women's roles were tightly scripted, veils were quiet power, cloaking their wearers in grace, mystery, and just a hint of rebellion. If you wanted to scream wealth in the Middle Ages, fur-trimmed cloaks were your megaphone. These weren't just coats, they were walking fortunes, worn by nobles, knights, and rich merchants to dominate any room. Long and flowing, often sweeping the floor, cloaks were made from thick wool or lush velvet, lined with fur, ermine, sable or fox for the top tier, rabbit or lamb for the merely prosperous. Fur wasn't just warm, it was prestige, sourced from distant forests or traded across seas. Colours mattered, deep burgundy, royal purple or midnight black, dyed with rare pigments, turned heads and silenced rivals. Fastened with ornate brooches, gold filigree, silver knots, or gem-studded clasps, cloaks billowed with every step, perfect for storming into a feast or leaping onto a horse. They weren't just for winter. Cloaks were year-round theatre, draped over shoulders for effect even in spring. Commoners made do with coarse wool capes, maybe dyed with onion skins, but nothing matched the grandeur of a lord's cloak. They were practical too, hiding stains, shielding from rain, or serving as blankets on cold campaigns. Knights embroidered theirs with heraldic lions or crosses, turning every entrance into a power move. Women's cloaks often had hoods, blending elegance with enigma. Heavy, mud-prune, and a pain to clean, cloaks were the ultimate flex. Only the powerful could afford such glorious impracticality. They didn't just keep you warm, they wrapped you in authority, making every swirl a statement. Medieval shoes were where grit met glamour, balancing survival with swagger. For most, shoes were turn shoes, leather sewn inside out, then flipped for a snug fit, with thin soles that let you feel every pebble. Peasants wore ankle-high versions, undyed and patched, stuffed with straw for warmth in winter. They were tough but not waterproof, turning rain into a squelching ordeal. Wealthier folks had finer turn shoes, dyed red, green or brown, with pointed toes that grew comically long by the 14th century. These poulains had tips so extreme they curled upward, stuffed with moss or wool to hold shape, screaming, "I don't need to walk far." Long toes equaled high rank. Only the rich could afford to stumble over their own feet. Nobles also wore embroidered slippers indoors or pattens, wooden platforms strapped over shoes to lift them above muddy streets. Shoes were handmade, costly, and repaired until they crumbled. For the poor, barefoot was common in summer, saving leather for winter. Shoes told tales. A labourer's were scuffed and sturdy, a merchant's polished and proud, a lord's absurdly extravagant. They weren't just footwear, they were a step into your world, carrying you through fields, courts, or chaos with quiet dignity or loud bravado. Jewellery was medieval bling, portable wealth that gleamed with power. Gold and silver rings, brooches, necklaces, and circlets were worn by men and women, each piece a tiny vault of status. The ultra-rich flaunted gems, rubies, sapphires, emeralds, while the prosperous settled for garnets, amber, or coral. Signet rings, engraved with crests, doubled as seals for letters or contracts, blending style with authority. Women layered necklaces with pendants, crosses for faith, hearts for love, or relics for protection. Brooches shaped like roses, lions, or stars, pinned cloaks or tunics, their craftsmanship tracing trade routes. Baltic amber, Persian turquoise, Italian enamel. Even clergy indulged. Bishops' rings or jewelled pectoral crosses proved piety could sparkle. Commoners treasured a pewter brooch or copper ring, maybe a fair day splurge etched with a crude flower. Jewellery wasn't just decor, it was currency, heirlooms and magic. Amulets warded off plague or curses. Losing one was a crisis. Gifting one sealed alliances or affections. In a world of mud and mortality, jewellery was a glint of forever, carrying stories of love, loss and legacy. Hose were medieval tights, sculpting legs and egos for men and women alike. Made from wool, linen, or rare silk, these snug leggings stretched from ankle to thigh, tied to a belt or tunic with cords. Peasants wore plain one-piece hose, like footed pyjamas, in drab tones, patched at the knees and sagging by day's end. They were warm but itchy, requiring constant tugging, enter the codpiece, a padded flap for modesty that became a bold, embroidered statement by the 15th century, shouting confidence. Nobles wore tailored hose in vibrant scarlet, azure, or gold, often party-coloured with contrasting panels to flaunt their calves. Women's hose, hidden under skirts, could be just as fine, sometimes stitched with delicate vines for private pride. Hose were hand-stitched, prone to tears during harvest or dances, and a pain to wash. They shaped medieval silhouettes, giving knights that leggy strut and ladies a sleek base layer. Wool chafed, seams burst, but hose were essential, lending medieval fashion its tight, proud lines and a touch of daring. Women's kirtles were the medieval little black dress, fitted, timeless, and endlessly versatile. Worn over a linen shift and under a surcoat, kirtles were long, tight gowns that hugged the torso, laced at the sides or back for a sculpted look. Peasant kirtles were wool or linen, dyed with homegrown herbs, woad for blue, madder for red, built for chores like milking or weaving, yet modest enough for church. Noble women's kirtles were silk or velvet in rich crimson, violet, or peacock green, with fur trim or silver embroidery. By the 14th century, kirtles pushed boundaries, low necklines, slashed sleeves revealing bright linings, or tight fits that flirted with scandal while dodging priestly glares. Kirtles were engineering, shaping the body to medieval ideals. Broad shoulders, cinched waists, graceful lines. Hand-sewn and costly, they were remade for new owners or cut into children's clothes. A peasant's kirtle was patched until it faded. A lady's was a showcase of wealth. In a world that boxed women into roles, kirtles let them carve out identity, one lace, one curve at a time. Belts were medieval multi-tools, style, function, and storytelling in one. Crafted from leather, cloth, or rare metal, they cinched tunics, secured hose, and carried pouches for coins, knives, or prayer beads. Peasants wore wide, worn straps, often homemade with iron or bone buckles, looping on tools or purses for market haggling. Nobles had slender belts of dyed leather or silk studded with silver, gold, or enamel, sometimes woven with charms for luck or love. Women's belts sat low, with ornate clasps, crosses, roses, or knots, or dangling trinkets that jingled softly. Belts were personal. A merchant sagged with keys, a knight's bore his dagger, a pilgrim's held holy tokens. They were traded, gifted, or passed down, their scuffs a map of life. In a world of baggy garments, belts gave shape and narrative, tying medieval fashion together with purpose and pride. Robes were medieval statement pieces, grand, flowing, and reserved for those with gravitas. Worn by scholars, clergy, or nobles for ceremonies, robes were long, voluminous, often wool or silk, in sober navy, crimson, or black, colours of authority. Clerics wore plain robes with wide sleeves for tucking manuscripts. Nobles chose velvet with embroidery or ermine, sweeping the floor for effect. They were heavy, impractical, and expensive, ideal for dazzling courts or cowing rivals. Commoners rarely wore robes, maybe renting one for a guild feast or wedding. Robes weren't daily wear, they were performance, cloaking wearers in wisdom or power. They hid flaws, stains, cheap tunics, or billowed during sermons or oaths. Tripping on stairs or dragging through mud was a risk, but that was their glory. Only the elite could afford such splendour. In a world of sweat and struggle, robes were a brush with the divine. Chainmail wasn't just armour, it was warrior fashion, blending grit with glory. Worn by knights and soldiers, this mesh of interlinked iron rings was medieval tech at its finest. Flexible, blade-resistant, but heavy as a grudge, up to 30 pounds. Worn over a gambeson, a padded tunic, it dulled slashes but turned every move into a workout. Wealthy knights had custom mail, polished to shine, paired with heraldic surcoats for flair. Chainmail was wealth, handcrafted, costly, often inherited or looted. Lesser soldiers wore patched, second-hand mail, still a shield against death. It wasn't just for war, knights donned it for tournaments or court to flex prowess. Hot, sweaty and clinking, it needed constant care. Squires scoured rust with sand. Chainmail was medieval bravado, worn with pride and a prayer, its weight a reminder of duty and danger. Gowns were the pinnacle of medieval women's fashion, regal, intricate, and reserved for the elite. Worn by noblewomen for feasts or weddings, gowns were floor-length with fitted bodices and flowing skirts, often silk or velvet in jewel tones, ruby, amethyst, or gold. Sleeves trailed or flared, lined with contrasting fabrics or fur, while bodices laced tightly, shaping the torso to courtly ideals. Embroidery, vines, birds, or crosses glittered with gold thread, pearls or gems studded necklines. Gowns were investments, costing as much as a horse, often gifted at betrothals or remade for daughters. Common women might wear a simple gown for their wedding, dyed with local herbs, but nothing rivaled a lady's splendour. Heavy and restrictive, gowns limited movement, perfect for showing you didn't need to work. They were theatre, transforming wearers into icons of grace, power and lineage, every rustle a reminder of privilege. Doublets were medieval menswear's evolution, fitted jackets that hugged the torso, giving knights and dandies a sleek silhouette. By the 14th century, doublets replaced baggy tunics for the fashionable, made from wool, linen or silk, padded for warmth or puffed for style. Nobles wore them in bold colours, crimson, peacock blue, with slashed sleeves revealing bright linings or embroidery. Fastened with laces or buttons, bone for merchants, silver for lords, they paired with hose for a leggy look. Peasants stuck to looser tunics, but artisans might splurge on a plain doublet for market days. Doublets were tailored, costly and prone to wear at the elbows, but they defined medieval swagger, sculpting the body into a V shape that screamed confidence and clout. Capes were medieval outerwear's unsung heroes, shorter than cloaks, more practical but no less striking. Worn by travellers, soldiers or townsfolk, capes were wool or leather, often hooded, reaching the hips or knees. Peasants had rough, undyed capes, tied with cords, perfect for rain or wind. Nobles wore capes in rich dyes, olive, burgundy, lined with fur or embroidered with stars or crosses. Knights draped capes over one shoulder for dash, while pilgrims pinned theirs with scallop shells. Capes were lightweight, easy to pack, and doubled as blankets or cloaks for disguise. Mud-stained or tattered, they told of journeys. Pristine, they spoke of wealth. In a world of weather and wanderers, capes were freedom, flapping with every step. Medieval fashion wasn't just about covering skin. It was a living chronicle of identity, ambition, and endurance, from the patched tunics of a peasant's dawn-to-dusk grind to the gilded gowns of a noblewoman's courtly dance. Every garment wove a tale of survival, status, and spirit. Hoods shielded dreams, veils whispered defiance, and chainmail carried the weight of honor. These clothes weren't fleeting trends. They were crafted with sweat, mended with care, and passed through generations, bearing stains, tears, and triumphs. They shaped bodies to ideals, signaled loyalty or rebellion, and stretched rules with a jeweled pin or a pointed toe. Fashion was a language, gruff yet graceful, humble yet haughty, spoken in every hem and buckle. It mirrored medieval life, raw, resilient, radiant. In every thread, you felt the pulse of a world that wore its heart on its sleeve, turning cloth into courage and every outfit into a saga. So, next time you slip on a coat, nod to those medieval trailblazers who made every garment a battle cry, a prayer, and a piece of eternity. You've already braved why it sucked to be gay in medieval times, gorged on the greasy wonders of medieval junk food, and strutted through the bold threads of medieval fashion. But our dive into the wild, torchlit world of the Middle Ages is far from over. Tonight, we're plunging into the bizarre, the quirky, the downright unsettling, the strange hobbies of medieval people. In an era without TikTok, arcades, or sci-fi novels, folks found peculiar ways to pass the time, chasing thrills and chills that make modern hobbies look tame. These pastimes were odd, sometimes macabre, but always pulsing with the raw, unfiltered spirit of medieval life. Before we wade into this weird tapestry of fun, smash that like button and subscribe if you're hooked on this time travel saga. Drop a comment, where are you tuning in from, and what's the clock saying? It's wild to picture folks from Hanoi to Houston joining us in this medieval freak show. I'm writing this at 3:03 p.m. in Vietnam, June 18, 2025. Let me know your vibe. Now, snuff the lights, clutch a warm mug, and let's creep into a world where hobbies were as strange as the souls who loved them. In a time when life was a gamble, plague, famine, or a stray arrow could end you, hobbies weren't just escapes. They were defiant acts of living. And for some, the weirder the better. Take relic collecting, a pastime that turned devotion into obsession. Medieval folks, from peasants to princes, were wild for relics, bits of saints' bones, locks of holy hair, or slivers of the true cross. These weren't just spiritual trinkets, they were supernatural power-ups, believed to heal, protect, or score heavenly points. Peasants saved scraps to buy a dubious saint's tooth from a wandering peddler, tucking it into a pouch for luck. Nobles went bigger, amassing collections in private chapels, gilded reliquaries stuffed with finger bones, skulls, or even shriveled tongues, displayed like macabre trophies. The weirder the relic, the better. Teeth of St. Apollonia for toothaches, milk of the Virgin for fertility. Pilgrims bartered for these at shrines, haggling over authenticity like modern sneakerheads. Fakes were rampant. A single saint could have enough bones to build 3 skeletons, yet the thrill wasn't just faith, it was the hunt, the brag of owning a piece of eternity. Monks fueled the craze, peddling relics to fund abbeys, while knights gifted them to curry favour. Collecting wasn't tidy. Relics were kissed, stroked, or boiled into healing brews, their grime part of the charm. It was morbid, sure. Imagine showing off a saint's knuckle at dinner, but it gave medieval life a strange glow, blending reverence with a collector's fevered glee. If relics were holy hoarding, public execution spectating was a grim communal hobby that drew crowds like moths to a pyre. Hangings, beheadings, or burnings weren't just justice, they were medieval blockbusters. Villages emptied for execution days, families packing picnics to watch a thief swing or a heretic blaze. It wasn't just bloodlust, though that played a part. For peasants, it was a rare break from toil, a chance to gawk, gossip, and feel morally superior. Kids climbed trees for better views, vendors hawked pies, and balladeers sang of the condemned's crimes. Nobles attended too, perched on platforms in velvet, treating it like theatre. The spectacle was the draw. A good executioner could sever a head in one swing, earning cheers. A botched job sparked boos or riots. Some watched for divine signs. Did the corpse twitch? Did ravens circle? Others bet on the condemned's last words, or how long they'd writhe. It was macabre, but it bonded communities, reinforcing us versus them in a chaotic world. Churchmen frowned, but rarely skipped a burning, claiming it was a lesson. The hobby wasn't passive. Crowds heckled, prayed, or looted bodies for lucky souvenirs, like rope or ashes. It was a dark mirror of medieval life, raw, communal, and unapologetically human. For those craving hands-on thrills, animal baiting was a brutal pastime that turned cruelty into sport. Picture a village green or city pit, where dogs fought bears, bulls, or badgers, cheered by roaring crowds. Bears were chained, bulls tethered, their horns blunted but their rage real. Dogs, bred for grit, lunged until blood flew, often their own. Peasants loved it, betting pennies or bragging rights on their mutt's courage. Towns held weekly baitings, drawing farmers, smiths, and kids, who shrieked as fur and dust flew. Nobles hosted grander versions, with trained mastiffs or imported lions, their guests wagering gold. It wasn't just entertainment, it was a twisted flex of human dominance over nature. Some saw it as training. Dogs that survived were prized hunters. Others just craved the chaos. The raw clash of fang and horn. Churchmen called it sinful, but kings and bishops rarely missed a good bait. The hobby was messy. Animals died, betters brawled, and pits stank of gore. Yet it thrived, feeding a medieval hunger for visceral thrills. It's hard to stomach now, but for them it was a loud, bloody escape from a world that chewed up humans just as fast. If baiting was loud, scrying was a quieter, creepier hobby, where folks peered into the supernatural for kicks and clues. Think crystal balls, but grittier. Polished stones, bowls of water, or even polished sword blades served as mirrors to glimpse the future or spy on spirits. Village wise women or cunning men led the charge, staring into murky surfaces to divine lost cows, cheating spouses, or coming storms. Peasants paid in eggs or ale for a session, huddled in smoky huts, hearts racing as the seer muttered cryptic visions. Nobles dabbled too, hiring astrologers or alchemists to scry in gilded chambers, seeking omens for wars or marriages. It was part magic, part theatre. Scryers spun vague prophecies, letting clients fill the gaps. The church branded it witchcraft, but plenty of priests snuck a peek at holy mirrors. Tools varied: obsidian for the rich, rainwater for the poor, even blood for the bold. Risks were real. Accusations of sorcery could land you in a dungeon, but the thrill of piercing the veil kept scrying alive. It wasn't just fortune-telling, it was a dance with the unknown, giving medieval minds a shiver of control in a world ruled by fate. For the truly eccentric, flagellation was a hobby that blurred devotion, pain, and performance. Groups of flagellants, mostly men but some women, whipped themselves with knotted cords or iron-tipped scourges, chanting psalms as blood ran. Born in times of crisis like plagues or wars, it was meant to appease God's wrath, but for some, it became a grim passion. Peasants joined processions, marching through villages, their lashes a public plea for mercy. Nobles did it privately, in chapels, their scourges silver-handled for piety with panache. It wasn't just masochism. Flagellants believed pain cleansed sins or earned divine favour. Crowds gathered to watch, awed or horrified, some joining in like a medieval mosh pit. The church waffled, praising zeal, fearing chaos, and banned public floggings. But secret groups persisted. It was intense, bloody, and oddly communal, bonding whippers through shared suffering. Wounds scarred, infections spread, but for devotees each lash was a step toward salvation. It's alien now, but it gave medieval souls a raw, visceral outlet for fear and faith. Grave robbing was a shadowy hobby for the bold or desperate, less about thrill than grim necessity, though some loved the creep factor. Medical knowledge was scarce, so students or healers dug up fresh corpses to study anatomy, sneaking into churchyards under moonlight. Peasants sometimes joined, scavenging graves for clothes, jewellery, or lucky bones sold as charms. It was risky. Caught robbers faced hanging or excommunication, but the payoff was high. A skeleton could fetch silver, a ring could feed a family. Some did it for kicks, swapping tales of haunted graves or ghostly moans, turning terror into tavern boasts. Nobles rarely dug themselves, but funded dissections, their curiosity cloaked in secrecy. Bodies were crude teachers, no formaldehyde, just stench and haste, but each cut revealed life's mystery. The church raged, calling it sacrilege, yet clerics bought bone amulets on the sly. Grave robbing wasn't just crime, it was a grim quest for knowledge or gain, laced with the thrill of defying death itself. Witch hunting, while not a hobby in today's casual sense, was a chilling obsession for medieval zealots, a dark pastime that thrived on fear, superstition, and the thrill of playing judge and jury. In villages where life was dictated by unpredictable harvests, sudden plagues, or unexplained misfortunes, some turned their anxieties outward, seeking scapegoats in the form of witches. These weren't the organised witch trials of the later Renaissance, with their grim tribunals and mass hysteria. Medieval witch hunting was raw, grassroots, and deeply personal. It was driven by a mix of religious fervour, neighbourly grudges, and a morbid fascination with the supernatural, making it a peculiar, if terrifying, way to pass the time. The hunters were often village busybodies, gossipy matrons, self-righteous yeomen, or fervent clerics with a nose for sin. They scrutinised their neighbours for signs of witchcraft, latching onto anything remotely odd. An old woman brewing herbal remedies for fevers, a loner muttering to her cat, a farmer whose cow died after a quarrel. Misfortune was evidence enough. Sour milk, a stillborn calf, or a storm ruining crops could spark whispers of curse. These amateur sleuths didn't work alone. They rallied allies, turning suspicion into a communal crusade. They'd scour woods for imagined covens, shadowy gatherings where witches supposedly danced with demons under moonlight. Evidence was flimsy but treated like gold. A knotted rag found in a barn, a dead hen with no clear cause, or a strange mark on a tree. These were hoarded like clues in a twisted treasure hunt, presented at village gatherings or to local priests as proof of dark deeds. The rewards weren't material, but social, and that's what fueled the frenzy. Accusing a witch gave hunters clout, elevating them from nobodies to guardians of righteousness. It was a chance to settle scores against a rival who outbid you at market, a neighbour who snubbed your family, or an outsider who never fit in. Pointing the finger also deflected suspicion. In a paranoid world, accusing first kept you safe. Some hunters revelled in the drama, spinning lurid tales over ale in smoky taverns, demonic pacts sealed in blood, midnight sabbaths with horned fiends, or spells cast to blight crops. These stories grew wilder with each retelling, blending fear with entertainment, like ghost stories told to thrill and chill. For the most zealous, witch hunting was a holy mission, a way to purge evil and earn God's favour, or at least the villagers' applause. But the risks were steep, adding a gambler's edge to the pursuit. False accusations could backfire spectacularly. If the accused had allies or proved their innocence, say through a public oath or a priest's blessing, the hunter faced ostracism, fines, or even counter-accusations of slander or witchcraft. And then there was the fear of real witches. Medieval folk genuinely believed in malevolent magic. A suspected witch might curse you with a glance, bringing illness, barrenness, or worse. Hunters hedged their bets with charms, iron nails, holy water, or whispered prayers, turning the hunt into a high-stakes duel with the unseen. Despite the dangers, the hobby fed on paranoia, giving these sleuths a dark sense of purpose. They weren't just meddling, they were warriors in a cosmic battle, wielding gossip as a sword. For the hunters, witch hunting was a twisted game of power, transforming superstition into spectacle. They'd stage confrontations, dragging suspects before crowds to face accusations, their voices rising with righteous fury. Some pushed for trials by ordeal, dunking in rivers to see if God spared the innocent, or demanded searches for witch marks, moles or scars, supposedly suckled by demonic familiars. The process was chaotic, often stopping short of execution in early medieval times, but the damage was done, reputations ruined, families shunned, lives upended. For victims it was a nightmare, for hunters it was exhilarating, a chance to play detective, priest and hero in a world where control was scarce. It was less about truth than theatre, a grim performance where fear wrote the script and paranoia sold the tickets. Effigy making was a peculiar medieval craft, a blend of artistry, spite and superstition that let folks curse their enemies without drawing blood. In a world where grudges festered over stolen pigs, broken betrothals or tyrannical lords, this hobby offered a cathartic outlet, turning rage into ritual. Villagers and nobles alike carved or moulded figures of their foes, from cheating merchants to cruel barons or faithless lovers, then destroyed them in acts meant to harm or humiliate from afar. It was part magic, part therapy, and wholly medieval, a strange dance of vengeance and creativity. The process was intimate and deliberate, starting with the crafting itself. Villagers used whatever was at hand, wood whittled into crude human shapes, wax softened over hearth fires, or straw stuffed into cloth sacks. The goal was resemblance, carving a sneering face, stitching a lock of stolen hair, or painting a name to bind the effigy to its target. Some added eerie details, nails driven into eyes for blindness, pins piercing hearts for pain, or rags stained with blood for potency. These weren't mere dolls, they were conduits, believed to channel harm through sympathetic magic. Peasants worked in secret, often at midnight or under a full moon, whispering curses or prayers to amplify the spell. They'd bury effigies under thresholds to jinx a foe's every step, toss them into rivers to drown their luck, or burn them in bonfires, watching flames consume their grudge. Nobles took it upscale, commissioning artisans to craft fancier effigies for political or personal vendettas. A rival king might be mocked with a wax figure in a crown, paraded at feasts before being melted in scorn. A disloyal vassal could face a wooden likeness, stabbed in a private chapel to curse his fortunes. These elite effigies were detailed, silk robes, glass eyes or real teeth, making their destruction a lavish spectacle. Some were used in public, like during rebellions to rally crowds against a hated figure without risking treason. The act of creation was as satisfying as the destruction. Carving a despised face let you savour your hate, each chip of wood or mould of wax a small victory. Destroying it was better. Fire, water or blade released pent-up fury. A symbolic slaying that felt as real as steel. The Church condemned effigy making as idolatry or witchcraft, preaching that only God could judge. Yet hypocrisy abounded. Priests and monks crafted effigies of heretics or demons, burning them in sermons to rouse the faithful. Layfolk ignored the sermons, blending Christian rites with pagan roots, psalms chanted over pins, holy water sprinkled on straw. Risks were low unless you were caught. Discovery could spark witchcraft accusations, with trials or banishment looming. But secrecy was easy. Effigies were small, rituals private, and neighbours often turned a blind eye, sharing the same grudges. The hobby was universal, crossing class lines, a peasant cursing a tax collector, a lady hexing a rival suitor, a knight damning a battlefield foe. Effigy making was pure catharsis, letting medieval souls vent without violence. It was creative, like sculpting with spite, and therapeutic, purging anger in a world where justice was rare. Each effigy was a story, of betrayal, envy or defiance, etched in wood or wax, then erased in flame or flood. It wasn't kind, but it was honest, a quirky craft that gave grudges form and let them burn bright, leaving only ashes in a strange, satisfied peace. Freak show spectating was a medieval pastime that fed a deep, uneasy curiosity for the unusual, pulling crowds to gawk at nature's oddities with a mix of awe, fear and judgment. Travelling troops roamed Europe, pitching tents in village squares or castle courtyards to showcase monsters, deformed animals, conjoined livestock or humans with physical differences, billed as divine omens, cursed prodigies, or living miracles. For medieval folk trapped in repetitive lives of plough and prayer, these shows were a rare window into the bizarre, a chance to glimpse a world beyond their muddy hamlets. The spectacles were raw and unpolished. A farmer might pay a penny to see a two-headed calf, its glassy eyes staring blankly, or a pig with extra legs squealing in a crate. Human performers, people with disabilities, albinism, or unusual features, were presented as wonders. Bearded women, giants, or dwarfs, often given mythic backstories as children of demons or gods' tests, troops leaned into the drama, draping stools in dark cloth, drumming to draw crowds or spinning tales of how a creature was born under a blood moon. Villages buzzed for days after, debating whether a three-legged goat signalled plague or a hunchbacked man was touched by angels. Nobles hosted private shows, marvelling at albino deer, conjoined fish, or jesters with unusual traits, treating them like living art. These displays weren't cheap. Performers and animals were fed, transported and guarded, but the coin flowed, as did the wine, turning gawking into a festive, if unsettling, event. Spectators didn't just stare, they engaged, making the hobby interactive and complex. Some saw divine messages, arguing a deformed lamb meant God's wrath, or a dwarf's wit proved holy favour. Others swapped local legends, tales of changelings, or cursed births, tying the show to their worldview. Pity stirred some to toss coins or pray for performers. Others mocked, seeking superiority in a world that humbled them daily. Kids mimicked the monsters in play, while elders whispered of omens over ale. The church waffled, preaching against vanity yet using prodigies in sermons as signs of sin. For spectators, it wasn't just entertainment. It was a philosophical wrestle, a chance to probe life's mysteries in a tent reeking of straw and sweat. Performers, often exploited, faced grim realities. Many were enslaved, bought or coerced, their strangeness a ticket to survival but not freedom. They played up their roles, growling like beasts, reciting scripted tales to earn tips or avoid beatings. Some, like court dwarfs, gained favour, even wealth, but most scraped by, their lives a cycle of stairs and travel. Spectators rarely saw the cost, caught in the thrill of the grotesque. By modern standards it was cruel, a violation of dignity, but for medieval folk it was a rare break from routine, feeding a hunger for the extraordinary. It wasn't kind, but it was human. A hobby that let them marvel, fear, and feel alive in a world where normalcy was relentless. Corpse medicine was a macabre medieval hobby, pursued by the daring, desperate, or deluded who believed human remains held miraculous cures. In a world where plague-swept villages and wounds festered fatally, some turned to the dead for salvation, collecting body parts, skulls, bones, fat, or blood for potions and powders. This wasn't mainstream medicine, but a niche obsession, blending crude science, ancient superstition, and a morbid thirst to outwit death itself. Peasants dabbled, often out of necessity. They'd buy bone dust from apothecaries, ground from executed criminals or exhumed graves, to sprinkle on wounds or mix with ale for aches. Skulls were prized. Moss scraped from them, called usnea, was thought to stop nosebleeds or heal fractures. Blood, drunk fresh or dried into cakes, was a folk remedy for epilepsy, believed to carry the soul's vitality. Sources were grim. Gallows provided thieves' blood, grave robbers supplied older parts, and some risked their own raids for fresh corpses. Recipes were shared in whispers. Fat rendered into salves for gout, marrow boiled with herbs for fevers, each batch a gamble between hope and horror. The poor couldn't afford much, so a single bone shard or vial of mummy used sparingly like a holy relic. Nobles took it further, their wealth fueling grotesque excess. They sought mummy from Egyptian tombs or fresh executions, imported at great cost for elixirs promising youth or vigour. Apothecaries sold it in gilded jars mixed with wine, myrrh or saffron for ailments from plague to impotence. Some lords kept private stashes, skulls on shelves, fat in vials, experimenting like alchemists. Dosing servants first to test effects, physicians, half scholars, half showmen. Prescribed corpse cures, citing ancient texts like Galen while dodging church scrutiny. The elite's obsession wasn't just health, it was status, a flex of defying mortality with forbidden knowledge. The practice was a strange alchemy, part rational, part deranged. Believers saw the body as a vessel of divine power, its parts retaining life's spark, A criminal's corpse was potent, hanged men's vitality supposedly lingered in their blood, yet risks abounded. Handling remains spread disease, rotting flesh bred miasmas, and thieves fought over grave spoils. The church wavered, condemning necromancy but tolerating sacred cures. Relics, after all, weren't far off. Theft was common, bones vanished from gibbets, graves were looted, adding a criminal edge. Practitioners faced stigma, neighbours whispered of sorcery, though many bought their wares in secret. Corpse medicine was a hobby of grim hope, driven by a primal urge to conquer death. Each potion mixed, each powder swallowed was a defiance of fate, a belief that life could be wrested from decay. It was gruesome, unhygienic, and often useless, but its allure endured, feeding medieval minds with a dark dream of immortality. In every skull cup or bloody brew, you saw their desperation and their daring to turn death into life. Joust watching was less a hobby than a medieval mania, a visceral obsession for those who craved danger without risking their necks. Tournaments where knights clashed in mock battles drew thousands, peasants, merchants, kings, packing fields or city squares to witness lances splinter, horses rear, and blood stain the dust. It wasn't just sport, it was a high-stakes spectacle, blending pageantry with peril, where the thrill of near death kept crowds roaring. The scene was electric. Villages shut down as folk trekked to tourney grounds, lugging bread and ale for all-day vigils. Peasants squeezed onto muddy slopes, while nobles lounged in canopied stands, their velvet gleaming. Knights, clad in polished armour etched with lions or crosses, paraded first, banners flapping, squires trailing with spare lances. The joust itself was chaos. 2 riders charged, lances aimed at chest or helm, wood chattering with a crack that echoed. A clean hit unhorsed a foe, earning gasps. A glancing blow drew jeers. Falls were brutal. Broken ribs, cracked skulls, and death wasn't rare, turning cheers to silence. Yet the risk was the lure, each tilt a brush with mortality that made spectators feel alive. Crowds didn't just watch, they lived it. Peasants bet on favourites, local knights or underdogs, wagering coins, cloaks, or a week's labour. Nobles staked gold or land, their cheers laced with politics, backing allies or snubbing rivals. Women tossed ribbons or gloves to champions, their gestures sparking romances or scandals. Men swapped tales of legendary tilts, Roland's lance, or a knight who rose bloodied to win. Kids mimicked jousts with sticks, dreaming of knighthood. Betting pools ran hot, who'd score first, who'd fall, or who'd beg mercy. Insults flew at faltering knights, yield, snail, while minstrels strummed ballads of the day's heroes. The air buzzed with hawkers selling pies, charms, or lance splinters as relics, turning chaos into carnival. Jousts were more than sport, they were medieval culture. They showcased chivalry, knights bowing to ladies or foes, but the gore was raw, injuries were badges. A knight limping off was a hero, his dented helm a trophy. Tournaments sealed alliances or sparked feuds, with nobles eyeing rivals as much as the field. For peasants, it was escape, a glimpse of glory beyond their plough. The church grumbled, calling it vain, but bishops blessed the games, drawn by the pomp. It was medieval UFC, a brutal ballet of skill and strength, where every crash fed a hunger for bravery and bedlam. For spectators, joust watching was a communal fever, a chance to scream, swoon, and stake their pride on steel and sweat. It wasn't safe or subtle. It was loud, bloody, and electric, a hobby that let them taste the edge of medieval life without lifting a lance. Charm crafting was a clandestine medieval art, a quirky hobby where folks fashioned amulets to fend off evil, boost luck, or bend fate in a world bristling with unseen threats. From peasants to nobles, people believed charms held power, tiny talismans to shield against demons, disease, or bad harvests. It was a creative, secretive pursuit, like a medieval DIY project laced with mysticism, blending pagan roots with Christian prayers into objects of quiet defiance. Materials were eclectic and eerie, each chosen for its mystic weight. Peasants gathered herbs, vermilion for love, rue for protection, or animal parts, hare's feet for speed, owl feathers for wisdom, or toadstones, fossilized fish teeth, for poison detection. Stones, polished by rivers, or knotted cords held power too, their shapes tied to old lore. Villagers scavenged these in woods or markets, trading whispered tips on which claw worked best. Nobles used finer stuff. Silver etched with crosses, amber beads, or coral blessed by priests, worn under tunics or sewn into hems. Crafting was ritual, tying herbs into linen pouches at dawn, whispering psalms or old spells, or burying charms under hearths for home safety. Some etched runes, blending Viking or Celtic signs with saints' names, creating a hybrid faith that baffled clerics. The process was social yet hidden. Women swapped recipes at wells, mint with iron for safe births, hazel for fertility, while men shared warrior charms in taverns. Crafters learned from elders or wise folk, their knowledge oral laced with taboos. Never craft during a storm, lest spirits steal the charm's power. Charms were personal, a mother's knot for her child, a lover's token for fidelity. They weren't flashy. A plain sack hid a potent mix of bone and prayer, meant to work unseen. Risks loomed as the church eyed charms with suspicion. Too much magic, pagan chants or odd rites could spark witchcraft accusations, with trials or banishment. Yet most charms passed as pious, using holy words or relics. Crafters walked a tightrope, their faith a shield against scrutiny. The reward was comfort. A charm in a pocket felt like armor against a cruel world, a spark of control in chaos. Charm crafting was a hobby of hope and ingenuity, letting makers play alchemist with scraps and spells. Each amulet was a story of fear, love, or survival, woven into a quiet rebellion against fate. It wasn't science, but it was solace. A craft that gave medieval life a touch of magic, one knot at a time. Mock battles were a rowdy medieval favourite, a hobby that let youths and warriors play at war with blunted weapons and boundless energy. Villages turned fields into battlegrounds, pitting teams, often rival hamlets or guilds, against each other in chaotic wars that mimicked knights or crusaders. It was play with purpose, blending fun with training, but the sheer thrill of the brawl kept it alive, a chance to swing, sweat, and strut in a world that demanded constant grit. The setup was simple but spirited. Boys, young men, and occasionally women, gathered on feast days or idle afternoons, armed with sticks, wooden swords, or blunted farm tools. Teams formed by loyalty, smiths versus millers, North Village versus South, each with a goal: capture a flag, a rag on a pole, seize a king, or just drive the enemy off. Rules were loose. First to yield loses, no eye gouging, but chaos ruled. Fighters charged, yelling war cries, swinging with more zeal than skill, while dust and cheers rose. Spectators, often women or elders, refereed or roused the crowd, shouting taunts or praise. Victors won ale, boasts, or a wreath of wild flowers, while losers nursed bruises as badges of effort. Nobles held fancier versions, with squires in padded armour, wielding mock lances under banners' shade, wielding their skills in grand spectacles. Nobles watched, scouting talent for retinues, but peasants loved their rougher scrums, where a baker could slay a tanner and crow for weeks. Kids joined, swinging twigs, learning to dodge and dream of knighthood. Women rarely fought, but cheered or tossed stones in jest games, their laughter fueling the fire. Some battles grew big, hundreds clashing in town fairs, turning play into pageantry. It was practical, prepping men for militia or tavern brawls. Skills, parry, teamwork, dodging a blow, saved lives in raids or feuds, but the fun was in the chaos: a friend's grin mid-fight, a tumble into nettles, or a surprise flank. Injuries were real: split lips, sprains, broken fingers, but rare, as most pulled blows. Bonds formed deep through sweat and bruises, forging friends or foes. Mock battles were a hobby of youth and defiance, a chance to play hero in a world that ground down heroes. They were loud, messy, alive, letting medieval folk taste glory with sticks and swagger, every clash a fleeting escape from fate's heavy hand. Dream interpretation was a quirky medieval obsession, a hobby where folks unravelled sleep's cryptic tales for clues to guide their waking lives. In a world where omens lurked in every cloud or crow, dreams were seen as divine or demonic dispatches, packed with warnings, prophecies, or truths. Peasants and nobles alike pored over their night visions, seeking signs of betrayal, bounty, or doom, turning this pastime into a personal puzzle, a curious blend of prophecy and curiosity, and dread of the unknown. Peasants shared dreams over morning bread, recounting snakes slithering through fields or teeth crumbling like ash. Meanings were law-based. Snakes spelled deceit, falling meant ruin, a crown hinted at glory. Wise women or village elders played seers, citing oral traditions, herbals or rhymes passed down for centuries. A farmer dreaming of wolves might be warned of thieves. A mother's vision of drowning could spark fear of a child's fever. Interpretations were vague, shaped by local fears, crop failure in lean years or war in tense ones, letting dreamers project their worries onto the tale. Nobles sought grander insights, hiring priests, scholars or astrologers to pass visions of battles or crowns. Dream books, like the Criticon of Artemidorus, were treasures blending Greek lore with Christian spins, lions for Christ, blood for martyrdom. A lord's dream of flight might signal victory, a lady's of a broken mirror could hint at betrayal. Scribes recorded these, tying them to stars or saints' days for weight. Rituals were added, rituals fasting before sleep or praying to St. Gabriel for clearer dreams, to enhance the vision's potency, making interpretation a high art. The hobby was social, sparking debates in taverns. Families swapped dream tales, arguing over signs. Friends bet on outcomes. Was it a good omen or a bad one? It was creative, letting minds weave stories from fragments. And cheap, only time and wit needed. Risks were low, save for dreams too dark. Visions of devils could draw witchcraft, whispers, but most kept them vague to stay safe. Dream interpretation was a game of wonder, feeding a medieval thirst for meaning in a world awash in signs. Each dream was a thread to fate, a chance to wrestle with the unseen or a glimpse into the unknown, giving life a quirky, quiet magic woven into their daily lives, one vision at a time. Rat-catching was a grimly satisfying hobby for some in medieval Europe, blending pest control with a gritty competitive edge. Towns and villages were overrun with vermin, scurrying through thatch, spoiling grain and spreading disease, so enterprising folk, often youths, vagrants or poor labourers, turned their menace into a game. Armed with clubs, traps or snarling terriers, they hunted rats in cellars, alleys and barns, transforming a civic chore into a strange source of pride and thrill. The hunt was relentless and raw. Rat-catchers prowled at twilight when rats grew bold, setting snares of twine or baited cages with crusts. Some used dogs, lean, fierce terriers bred to dive into nests and snap spines, while others swung sticks with deadly aim, tallying kills like warriors. In cities, rat pits were a spectacle, a fenced arena where bettors watched dogs slaughter dozens, cheering each crunch. Catchers kept score, boasting of hauls 50 in a night was braggable, 100 legendary. Prizes were practical, pelts sold for gloves or purses, tails earned guild bounties or kills won a jug of ale. Guilds or mayors paid for sacks of dead rats, though clever catchers sometimes reused corpses to scam extra coin. It wasn't just duty, it was sport. Youths raced rivals, pitting their dogs or traps against mates, their banter sharp as claws. Some crafted traps, wooden snaps or sticky pits, as art, swapping designs like recipes. Kids joined, chasing rats with slings or stones, their squeals echoing in streets. The thrill was in outsmarting a foe that plagued every home. Each kill felt like vengeance for gnawed shoes or spoiled stew. Spectators gathered at pits, betting pennies or shouting tips, turning hunts into gritty theatre. Danger was real. Rats bit. Fingers, ankles, faces and their fleas carried fevers, even plague. Pits were blood-soaked, dogs died, and catchers got mauled breaking up fights. Stench clung, gutted rats reeked, as did the hunters' damp dens. Yet stigma was low. Rat catchers were heroes of the poor, their grit admired. Nobles rarely joined, but their stewards hired pros to clear manors, and knights bet on pit dogs for kicks. Rat catching was a hobby of cunning and grit, a grim triumph in a filthy world. Each kill was a small win, a defiance of chaos, proving you could master the small terrors underfoot. It was dirty, dangerous, but oddly alive, turning vermin into victory with every snap of a trap. Medieval people's strange hobbies weren't just quirks, they were a wild, defiant pulse in a world of shadows and struggle. From hoarding saintly bones to cheering at gallows, or scrying in murky bowls to whipping themselves bloody, these pastimes were raw, unfiltered expressions of human curiosity, fear, and thrill. Relic collecting chased eternity, grave robbing sought life's secrets, animal baiting roared against nature's chaos. Each hobby, no matter how macabre or odd, carved joy, meaning, or power from a life that offered little. They weren't clean or kind by modern standards, but they were honest, binding communities through shared awe, dread, or defiance. In every effigy burned, every rat chased, every vision scried, you felt medieval life, grimy, bold, alive. These weren't mere distractions, they were rituals of resilience, turning fear into fascination and hardship into strange delight. So next time you doom scroll or binge a show, tip a nod to those medieval weirdos who found magic in the morbid and made every eerie pastime a testament to surviving, thriving, and embracing the beautifully bizarre. The medieval world, for all its vibrant quirks and peculiar passions, was a crucible of relentless hardship where every day tested the limits of human endurance. Our journey through the strange hobbies of the Middle Ages, witch hunting's paranoid crusades, effigy-making's vengeful art, or the grim thrill of rat-catching, reveals a people who carved out joy and meaning from a life steeped in toil, fear, and fragility. These hobbies, as bizarre and often unsettling as they were not mere diversions. They were lifelines, desperate sparks of humanity in a world that offered little mercy. To reflect on medieval life is to confront a reality so grueling that it makes our modern existence feel like an unearned miracle, a stroke of cosmic luck that demands gratitude as deep as the ages that separate us. Imagine waking each dawn in a medieval village, your breath visible in the chill of a thatched hut, the straw floor damp beneath your feet. The air reeks of smoke, sweat, and the faint rot of yesterday's scraps. Your body aches from labour, ploughing fields, hauling water, or spinning wool until your fingers blister, because survival demanded every waking hour. Hunger was a constant shadow. A bad harvest could mean months of gnawing on barley gruel or scavenging nettles to stave off starvation. Disease was a spectre, lurking in every flea bite, every sip of tainted water. The Black Death, smallpox, or a simple infected wound could snatch a child, a spouse, or an entire community in days, with no antibiotics or hospitals to intervene. A toothache was a torment, treated with crude pulls or left to fester. A broken bone might heal crooked, crippling you for life. Medicine was as much prayer as practice, with leeches, herbs, or corpse-directed potions offering more hope than cure. Life expectancy hovered in the 30s or 40s for those who survived childhood, and even the young weren't spared. Half of infants died before their 5th birthday, leaving parents to bury their futures in shallow graves. Beyond the physical grind, medieval life was a maze of fear and constraint. The church loomed like a colossus, its sermons promising salvation but threatening hellfire for the slightest deviance. Superstition wove through every act. A storm was God's wrath, a miscarriage a witch's curse. Social order was ironclad. Peasants served lords, lords served kings, and stepping out of place risked flogging, exile, or worse. Women especially bore a double yoke, their lives bound by marriage, childbirth, and domestic drudgery, with little voice or autonomy. To be different, whether in love, faith, or behaviour, was to invite suspicion. Witch hunters prowled for scapegoats, and nonconformists faced ostracism or the pyre. Justice was a luxury. A lord's whim or a mob's rage could end you, with no fair trial or appeal. War was a constant drumbeat, from Viking raids to crusades, leaving villages burned, crops trampled, and families shattered. Even peace was no respite. Taxes bled you dry, and bandits roamed the roads, turning a trip to market into a gamble with your life. In this world, hobbies like scrying or joust watching weren't just pastimes, they were acts of defiance against despair. A peasant crafting a charm from hare's feet was grasping at control in a universe ruled by chaos. A crowd cheering a knight's lance strike was stealing a moment of glory from a life of grime. These strange pursuits, whether morbid, like corpse medicine, or cruel, like freak show gawking, were born of necessity. a way to wrestle meaning from suffering. They reflect a resilience that humbles us, a refusal to let hardship snuff out the human spark. Yet they also underscore the era's brutality. A hobby like effigy making let you curse a foe without bloodshed, but it thrived because justice was scarce. Rat catching turned vermin into sport, but it existed because filth and plague were inescapable. These pastimes were creative, even poetic, but they grew from a soil of scarcity and fear, where joy was a rare flower blooming in cracked earth.